call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Mao.
Here.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Terrific. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's meeting. Just to quickly review our agenda for this evening, after I go over the next couple of meetings, we will read into the record our proclamation for Energy Efficiency Month. We will have public comments on voting items, followed by general public comments, council comments, and then the city manager's comments this evening. Our voting session tonight is regarding appointing election judges, amending our Safe Grow Act, a resolution on the proposed additional North Bridge crossing, a resolution about appointments to our tree commission. We also have two work sessions this evening, a presentation of draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, and a discussion of the FY 2018 Budget Amendment Number 2. This evening, the council is not scheduled to talk specifically regarding the development at Tacoma Junction, but during public comment time, people may speak to that, and council members may speak to it during their council comment time. I just want to make sure people understand that tonight the council is not speaking specifically on Tacoma Junction. We will be doing that again next week. So next week, what are we doing? As of next week, there are 2 meetings left of this City Council. Next Wednesday, on October 25th, we will be voting on a resolution expressing the sense of council regarding the Tacoma Junction redevelopment concept plan, a second reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 election, second reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act, first reading ordinance approving the FY 2018 Budget Amendment Number 2, single reading ordinance authorizing a contract to augment the traffic study for Tacoma Junction redevelopment, a single reading ordinance authorizing execution of a contract with Capital FlexiPave, an ordinance authorizing execution of a contract to purchase a backhoe, resolution providing for the appointments to the Board of Elections, and a resolution to other appointments and reappointments to committees. Our work session next week will be a discussion of legislative priorities, a discussion of a proposed amendment to the City Charter, Section 702, and a discussion of placing a covenant to protect the natural area known as Dorothy Woods. And then November 1st, the last meeting of this City Council, we will have a voting session. The first item is a resolution providing for appointments to the Tacoma Park Youth Council, a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for a compensation study, and a single reading ordinance approving, the second reading ordinance approving FY 2018 of Budget Amendment Number 2. Okay, and now for the read into the record, I have a proclamation recognizing October as Energy Efficiency Month. Actually don't have it, but we will have the proclamation. I will sign it. It is a proclamation. October is Energy Efficiency Month. It is. I do have it here. So I won't read this whole thing. I'll just say that people can read the whole thing online. October is Energy Efficiency Month. Residents of Tacoma Park can continue to contribute to our energy efficiency efforts by participating in the city's energy efficiency programs. And along with that, I just wanted to make an announcement that this year, Tacoma Park was named Maryland's Sustainability Champion in the state of Maryland. We are... Oh, and there's the plaque. Awesome.
It's a lovely plaque.
It is.
Love it.
Cities across the state of Maryland compete for this. We got 650 points this year. That's 500 points above the minimum. So we literally blew away the competition this year. Great. So those are those announcements. Now we'll have public comments on voting items. So if you would like to comment on the first reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 city elections, please come to the podium. No takers? Okay. Now we have the first reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act to add neonicotinoids to the list of restricted cosmetic lawn care pesticides. Any public comments on that? All right. 1 second, Mr. Lovelace. We'll get you the microphone. Go ahead, Mr. Lovelace.
Okay, this is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate.
And one way to make peace is to make your environment a safe place for people to work, live, and thrive. And the neonicotinoids apparently kill off all insects, even the beneficial ones. It may be it's damaging to bees, spiders, and other beneficial insects and arachnids that we need. Because without them, it's going to be a real problem keeping other insects down if the neonicotinoids don't work. And also, we won't get cross-pollinated because the bees will be wiped out. And we cannot and will not tolerate this. And I want you people to ban the neonicotinoids because I don't want to see our beneficial insects and wildlife put in jeopardy. And who knows, 10 years down the road, we may find out they're causing cancer and behavioral problems in children. We don't know. So please think about our future when you vote on this, not just how much money will be saved by poisoning the land, because that's just a short run. The long run is if we let this stuff go unchecked, we're going to be the losers. Thank you very much. Love it, love it, love it.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelace. Anyone else would like to speak to the amending of the Safe Grow Act this evening? Okay, no other comments regarding the amending of the Safe Grow Act. Ms. Taddeo, do you have a comment? Yeah. You just got here just in time.
Hi, Julie Taddeo, Ward 2. I'm all in favor of adding the neonics. We all want to save the bees, so I hope you'll be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to speak to this?
Hi, Cindy Dibella, co-chair of the Environment Committee, reminding you all, I think you got an email, that the Environment Committee endorses doing this.
Thank you. And thank you for the Committee on the Environment for looking at this for us. Great. Any other public comments on this voting item? Okay, we'll move on to our third voting item this evening. That is a resolution expressing the Council's position regarding the proposed additional North Bridge crossing. Any public comments on that? Okay, then our final voting item is a resolution providing for appointments to the Tree Commission. Any public comments on that? Oh, all right, then we will move on then to general public comments. So this can be public comments on anything. Mr. Lovelace, go ahead.
Okay, this is Pat Lovelace again, still your peace delegate. I want to remind you people out there that it's only 20 days left before we vote. 2 weeks and 6 days. That's how fast the time is going on. It seems just like a few days ago, or just the other day, that I was announcing that it was 48 or 49 days before we vote. And that's just how fast time is going by. So please, everybody, don't forget to get registered and get down here and vote, especially you 16-year-olders. Be sure and pick up the responsibility with pride. And also, I want to point out to you people that people must get active in gun control. And I'd like to see the Young Activist Club maybe take that issue up. Because 3 more people in Maryland got shot today. And the guy went over the state line into Delaware and shot somebody there, too. And they're still having a manhunt trying to find him. And that's, again, what happens if we don't stem the violence. It'll stem us. So please, vote with responsibility every time you pick up that ballot, because that is your vote, and that does count. Don't say your vote don't count, because that's BS. That's a cop-out. I'm going to be down there whether it's sunny, whether it's rainy, or no matter what it is. I'll be down there most of the day carrying the peace sign. And that's the optimum goal. Is what we're looking for, is a peaceful environment and a peaceful society. So please, 20 more days left to vote, and that's not much. Thank you very much. I'll see you at the polls, I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelace. Any other general public comments this evening?
Good evening, Bruce Williams, Lincoln Avenue. I want to take a moment to step back and provide a long-range perspective from my more than 25 years of engaging with efforts to think about how to improve Tacoma Junction. I was one of 5 co-chairs of the SS Carroll Neighborhood Association dealing with the junction and traffic and safety issues in the late 80s and early 90s. We advocated for changing the manner of pedestrian crossings and traffic light timings. I was a member of the city's Tacoma Junction Development Citizens Advisory Committee in 92 and 93, and we provided input to the council about how to redevelop the junction. I was Ward 3 council member when the city bought what was known as the Zarpus lot, which then became known as the City Lot. I was chair of the city's Tacoma Junction Planning Network in 95 and 96. I was council liaison to the Tacoma Community Development Corporation in 96 and 97. I was on the council when the city put out an RFP looking for development partners that no one responded to. I think that was in the late 90s. I was mayor 3 years ago when the current junction redevelopment process started. When I thought about retiring after serving for 22 years as a leader in this community, I felt good about the process that had been put in place, and I felt good about the progress that had been made. I had confidence that I could hand things over to this current council and that you would do great things. The previous council that I led took a year to construct the development agreement, and this council refined it and brought it to life. It contains all the elements that this community felt were important. Recognize that the developer has responded to our expressed needs. Remember that the community has provided and continues to provide feedback on every step of this process. You've directed this process. You've continued to work through the steps necessary to get us to this point. Don't let us fall from this path that we as a community have been headed down for over a quarter century. Persist, stay focused, don't get diverted by attempts to sidetrack or reverse this effort. Don't get waylaid by constantly changing demands from people who don't want to see this project go forward. Please continue to direct this process, continue to work with a responsive partner in NDC, and feel confident that things are in good shape so that you're handing over a strong, viable project to a new council next month. Give them a firm foundation from which they can continue to work to bring to this community the benefits that we all want and the benefits that we're more than ready to enjoy from a newly redeveloped Tacoma Junction. Thank you.
Hi, Julie Taddeo again, Ward 2. I'm just here to show my support for what you've been working on. I look forward to the development going ahead. I know the integrity of the co-op will be preserved. I was concerned listening to the Tacoma radio show this weekend, and someone had suggested doing more studies. That lot, it's not doing anything for the environment. We're not generating revenue, so I hope we're not going to waste more time and money on studies, and hope to see groundbreaking, within a year. But thank you for all the thoughtful hard work that you've been doing, and I'm excited about the development. I know some people don't like the 3 stories. 2 stories is fine, Tim. But whatever you come up with, I think it's going to be great for that area, because right now a lot is not so beautiful. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Rick Weiss, Ward 3. I think one correction there, it's not true that the lot isn't generating revenue. It is generating revenue right now from the co-op, and in fact, as I understand it, it's generating more revenue than it's anticipated to generate over the next 10 years if this development goes forward. But that can be fact-checked. 3 points I wanted to make. One, to reiterate a little bit what I mentioned last week. I was just walking here this evening, and I came to a little piece of sidewalk on Carroll near my home as I was walking down this way, and I saw those little blue and yellow tiles I've mentioned before that are worked into the sidewalk, and I noticed there was just a little blip, like a little neurological peak for a moment of, oh, something pretty in my sidewalk. It was great. It's the kind of little happy moment that you want to have in your little hometown that makes you feel good about how things have gone. And I'm not going to have that kind of neurological blip when I go down Carroll Avenue and there's a big development right out to the sidewalk and there's a semi-tractor trailer parked where there used to be just open street at least. So I'm still not happy with the scale size of the development as planned. Another point I wanted to bring up that got raised last week had to do with the study that looked at commercial potential and commercial demand in that area, which, if you're a business person, is very inspiring to know that there's economic potential here. But that was a study that was designed to look for commercial demand. It was not a study that was designed to ask people how would you like to have some open space? How would you like to have some green space? And I think that study would have given you some similarly strong positive results that, yeah, we want that. So what about a study that actually does take all of those things into account at once? Well, there was one of those years ago. There was, in fact, a long process that led to the design of what we wanted in this town, and that design that everyone agreed on, that had input from both people who wanted park space and environmental open space, and included inputs from people who believe in commercial development there, came up with a picture that's very different than the one that's in front of you right now. And I would encourage you to look back at what the people asked you to do back then. And I am not trying to sideline this process, a word that Bruce used. I'm not trying to block this process, a word that Bruce used. I'm looking to see this thing go forward in a way that feels in scale and that is in line with, reasonably in line with, the vision that that you folks heard from the community way back years ago when this process started. I think we should develop it. It sounds to me like there might even be some extra square footage that we can play with the adjoining property. We need to see a road that goes back to the back of the co-op so that deliveries can be made there in an environmentally and aesthetically nice way, and have a development that leaves public space and green space for the people to use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Roland Weiss, Ward 3. I live on Columbia Avenue. I wasn't able to make the meeting last week, but I have watched at least some of the videos, and I just wanted to thank the mayor and the council and the city staff for the enormous amount of effort this kind of thing takes. It always amazes me how you can take that much, put that much effort in with having other jobs. Also appreciate all of the citizen input. I'm personally glad that the council posed hard questions for both NDC and the co-op, because I think that there's issues there that need to be addressed. You already had a lot of comments on the scope, so I'm going to focus on something different, which is the process that's being followed. I have a couple of suggestions. Right now, the image you get by looking at the presentations and on the city website is that this is going to go forward sort of with these public hearing comments to various boards, et cetera, et cetera. While those are necessary, I don't believe that they're sufficient. Specifically, in terms of this concept plan, what I suggest is you're going to be making your comments on the current concept, and that'll be updated. Then there's going to be traffic studies. I suggest that rather than going immediately to the site plan, that the feasibility of those of the traffic changes that you can make be incorporated into an update of the concept, and that the citizens and the council, et cetera, all have input into that. That's faster and cheaper than developing the whole site plan and then having to redo it. You want to catch problems as early as possible. I think NDC ought to be able to give you input on that in terms of traffic. They ought to be able to run different scenarios. In addition, in the 2014 pitch, I noticed that there was a lot of citizen involvement outside of it. I was expecting meetings like we had in March, February and March, that would extend throughout the process. That adds quite a bit because while the formal hearings are necessary, the informal ones allow for interchange among all the parties. And this was used to address the problems with the fire station process, which strictly stuck with these formal hearings, and Bruce can tell you how contentious those became until the city organized a separate venue. Last is, just in terms of specifics from the rear, I'd like to see sketches of what it looks like from Poplar, Columbia, and Syric Avenue. I like the council comments with respect to improvements to the wooded lot. And
can you just email this? Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Keith Kozloff, again on Sycamore, talking about the junction. My comments focus more on process than design. In moving from concept to site design, I hope the council can negotiate hard and walk away if NDC is unable to address issues to the city's satisfaction. Don't get seduced by the substantial time and resources you've invested to date. While the city doesn't know how far NDC can go to address the city's priorities before the project becomes unviable, it does need to probe trade-offs. For example, according to a builder I know, underground parking is a major cost which boosts rents relative to not including this amenity. Second, while residents near the junction have the greatest stake in its outcome, the council must balance interests among our entire diverse community. The advisory committee held meetings in all wards and surveyed residents with over 500 respondents. According to the committee's findings in April, the community is generally confident about the process moving forward. Third, I don't know if there's any representatives of the co-op or NDC tonight, but I implore them to push the reset button. To an outside observer, they've never achieved a functional negotiating relationship. To the co-op, I say, ditch your real estate lawyer based on poor results, and with NDC, spend that money to hire an independent mediator. As a reminder, mediation is a voluntary process that creates conditions for building trust between parties in conflict, surfaces their underlying interests, and helps them uncover mutually acceptable solutions to a dispute. A mediator does not propose solutions, much less impose them, and either party can exit mediation at any point. As an example of a mutually acceptable solution, if the co-op had access to more on-site storage, the frequency of deliveries might be substantially reduced, and this would alleviate pollution, noise, and congestion from delivery trucks, not to mention reduce operating costs. While the co-op currently doesn't want to rent retail space from NDC's project, it could rent storage space at the back, perhaps at a reduced rate. The disruption to co-op operations to build out the space would be much less than under the co-op's original expansion plan, which would require tearing out its entire west wall. I don't know if this is a workable idea, but if the two parties had a relationship that allowed them to jointly explore such solutions, the community could benefit as well. Thanks.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Baraimo. I'm a resident in Ward 6, and if I may, if you will indulge me, I'm here representing the Winters Protection Group. So Benita Myers, who's one of the, I guess you could say one of the organizers or one of the leads, she was going to read the proposal that I understand all the council members have received. So I volunteered because she had a scheduling conflict tonight. So I'm not going to read everything, but I just want to touch on some really salient points that the group collectively would like to make you aware of. And then if I may also speak as a resident immediately after, or I could get back in line, whichever way, but I'm kind of doing double duty, if that's okay.
All right, that's fine. I think I had spoken with representatives of CHEER, and I asked that other people had requested additional time this evening. But if you could please, I reset the clock. If you could please try and keep it to 3 minutes, I'd appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right, so as many of you know, we stood before you last year to discuss proposed changes regarding exemptions from rent stabilization, which we are suggesting require a vote by City Council, not by administrative action. The current administrative approval process for granting rent stabilization exemptions provides for no scrutiny or transparency over the terms or implications of the rental limiting agreements on tenants. This is unacceptable to us, and we speak on behalf of many tenants. If the above-mentioned option is problematic for the council, then we propose the following three suggestions as acceptable solutions. One, to establish an independent panel be created and empowered by the city to review and approve rent stabilization exemption petitions. Two, a rent stabilization exemption would only be granted if the affected tenant association approves it. In other words, they sign off on it. And then three, the city council member of the ward where the property is located would approve or sign off on the exemption. Landlords who have been granted rent stabilization exceptions must continue to file an annual rent report for each rental unit. So going forward, this information would be made available to the public upon request. And then the other item that we'd like to have you also focus on is the city's current code enforcement policies are not sufficient to prevent some of our apartment stock from being in a state of chronic disrepair or deteriorating into deplorable conditions. For example, what happened at Hampshire Towers prior to its renovation and 636 Houston Avenue apartments. We ask that the Council begin receiving quarterly reports for all properties with outstanding code violations that are at least 60 days old. Properties on this report should be given no more than an additional 30 days to correct all code violations. If the property is not brought into compliance within 30 days, the city should begin levying fines, removing ownership, and taking other significant actions, including revoking rent stabilization exemption if one has been granted, to quickly bring the property into compliance. So thank you. That's the proposal representing Renters Protection Group. So I'm looking at the time, and I'll make it very quick. Last year, I know that we stood before this very council, minus Jared, and I think Mr. Kovar wasn't present, and we had a lot of residents that spoke before you regarding the impact of granting rent stabilization exemptions. I understand it's just 100%, like rubber stamping them. So we think that that process is not fair to the renters that it ultimately impacts, as evidenced by what happened at Hampshire Towers. So we're just trying to have a meeting of the minds to try to develop or to establish some type of process that would be fair to all stakeholders, including the renters. So I'm just going to leave you with this. This is election season, and each one of you, or those who are running for office, you do what? You go out to your constituents, you go out to the citizens, and you ask for their vote, correct? So we respectfully ask you to vote on this situation with some level of expediency so this does not continue to drag on. Thank you.
Thank you. No. No.
Margaret.
My name is Denise Jones, and I didn't prepare anything. I'm speaking extemporaneously, and I'm trying to speak on affordable housing. Number one, all those things that Margaret said have impacted me and some of my other neighbors at Essex House Apartments. 2 officers from the Tenants Association are here along with me. We have some other renters who are here in the back here. And there are 135 units in my building, and we were adversely impacted by the rubber stamping of the rent stabilization, frittering away, not frittering, it being written off by the request of the owners of our building. We've had ongoing issues. Affordable housing is key, and I'm dismayed that there isn't more money in the housing fund. It's not enough. I'm also dismayed as I think about the intersection of gentrification as related to the concerns of gentrification overall in the city, but particularly as related to the proposed monstrosity at the junction for that kind of development. I just don't see that as supporting the diversity that we say we enjoy here in the city. I came here from a few years before I moved to Tacoma Park. I came here from New York City, and I pay more in rent than I did then, and if I were to try to get an apartment here now in Tacoma Park, I couldn't afford it. I just couldn't. And I know I bring value just by virtue of, my person. I bring value, but we deliberately, the renters also pay taxes, and we bring value to the city in our diversity. And I just can't see that affordable housing is something you just want to write off. We need the supports. We need the supports that are proposed. I served on that Renters Protection Committee for the first year. I haven't had as much time to do it this year, but we need those supports, and we are vibrant contributors to the community of Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and Council. I'm Kelly Gibson. I'm a Ward 2 resident. My husband and I have lived in Tacoma Park in Ward 2 for 9 years. We've fallen in love with the city. We've fallen in love with the people. We've been inspired over the last couple years at the thoughtful development in other parts of Tacoma. And I just want to be on the record supporting the thoughtful nature of this new development at the junction and agree with the traffic study. I also do drop off and rush to work and get my kids to pre-K and all that kind of stuff. So I want to be thoughtful about making sure that development doesn't get in the way of any of that, but more places to gather with the community and businesses to support and ways I can spend my money inside of Tacoma Park as opposed to Washington, D.C., I'm very much in support of. So thanks very much.
Hi, Jessica Heppen, Ward 2 also. My husband, Cesar Ibanez, and I have lived in Tacoma Park for 13 years this month. I echo some of what Kelly Gibson just said. We appreciate the opportunity to gather in Tacoma Park rather than go to neighboring towns and cities. I want to echo strong support for development at the junction and appreciate the city's thoughtful process for moving this forward. We think this is a really great opportunity for Tacoma Park. We definitely understand that there are multiple considerations and it needs to move forward as a thoughtful process. We are excited about the idea of more local options, more opportunity for local businesses, more places to gather with friends, for our kids, for ourselves, more residents who can walk instead of drive. We look forward to that opportunity. We appreciate the city's work on this, including augmenting the traffic study. It seems really clear that improving the intersection and traffic flow at the junction will be really necessary and essential to the success of the project. So we appreciate your work on it and also want to be on the record for showing our support. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Navari, Ward 3. I wanted to thank Council and the Mayor for the hard work. I couldn't make last week's meeting because I was at the theater. My wife bought me tickets for my birthday. I didn't want to get her crosswise with her. But I've said this before. I grew up in Burlington, Vermont, and watched for many, many years as there was a war between the city and the developers over what to do with the lakefront property, which is critical. And they ended up settling on just an amazing mix of public space and park and a museum and cool restaurants. And I'm sure that was an arduous process. And I believe I have friends in this body, and I have neighbors on this body, and I've talked to other council members that are not in my ward over the years. I've been here 10 years now, and I believe you guys are every bit as capable as the folks in Burlington. So, whatever you guys can do to look at the plan and say, is this as good as it can get? And when you guys reach the point where you think this is as good as it can get for our community, that'll be an important milestone. But I believe you guys are every bit as capable as the folks in Burlington that held out for an amazing project. And it's tough negotiating because the developer naturally, as all business owners, as I was, want to maximize profit, which I have no problem with. But it was disappointing to see the last concept that didn't even show a square footage for the public space, which I kind of thought over 3 years you guys had made it pretty clear that was key. So I have faith, and I hope you guys hold out for something you can look in the mirror and say, this is a damn good plan, and it's a damn good plan for Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Diane Curran. I live in Ward 3. I just want to make a couple of comments tonight about the process for deciding what to do with Tacoma Junction going forward with development plans. I think it's very important to bear in mind, to remember that Tacoma Junction, the city-owned lot, is public property. This is owned by all the people of Tacoma Park. And so it's really important for the city to institute a process that allows full participation by the public and notice to the public of what issues are being decided. I do believe the City Council does have a very important role to play here, and that it's very important, in fairness to both the public and NDC, to be clear about what it is the city needs from this development. At this point, for various reasons, we are very early in the process. What was presented to the City Council at the end of September was called a concept plan. The word concept was first used in the concept proposal that the city adopted a couple of years ago, and because the negotiations with the co-op went on for a couple years, didn't work out, we are back again at the concept phase. I believe it is critically important right now for the City Council to give NDC direction on a number of issues. You heard comments from something like 45 people last week critical of the development scale, the problems with managing traffic, which, you know, some of this, you don't need a traffic study to know that adding 72 parking spaces in an underground parking garage and blending a bus stop, a lay-by, and crosswalks along a short piece of property facing Carroll Avenue is going to cause problems. You don't need a traffic study to know that needs to be addressed. What I think is really important for you to do is ask NDC to go back to the drawing board and give you a new concept plan that shows in detail how you're going to provide for public gathering space and how you're going to deal with the traffic issues and accommodate the co-op's delivery needs. We haven't seen a draft resolution even yet. This is really important for you to give us advance notice of what you're planning so that we can come back and comment to you. Next week is a big decision. Don't rush into it. Do it right. Thank you.
I'm Susan Schreiber on Willow Avenue. I wasn't going to hand this out, but I think I will because Bruce Williams was here. And is he still in the audience? No. Okay. What I have is a chart that the council put together back in February 9th, 2015. And those of you who participated in it remembered that the council members, and this excludes Peter Kovar and Rizzi Qureshi because you weren't on the council yet, it gave the council members a chance to rank what they thought was most important for this development. And I'm sorry, but Bruce Williams, who got this whole thing going, number 3, it said co-op expansion, co-op business continuity, green space, community engagement process, co-op loading zone. I just want you to take another look at this and really stick with the principles that you felt were so important in this process and really hold NDC, the developer, to really making serious, specific adjustments that really reflect the initial goals of this project, which are so important for the city. I also want to say, just reiterate, as I'm sure many people have, that those of us who are raising questions are not anti-development. I mean, there's some people who would like nothing. I hardly know anyone who would like that parking lot to stay just the way it is. I don't know anybody who would. But what we want to do is make sure that it reflects the needs and values of the community. And the last thing I have to say is that we've got a week, and I would seriously encourage each and every member of the council and also of the city manager and housing development office to pay a visit to the co-op. Go up there, see who's actually shopping. We hear a lot about how elite it is. See how diverse the clientele is. Look for some foods you like. Buy a couple of Mike Tabor's fabulous Honeycrisp apples, which are right out front. Because I know some of you shop at the co-op, but frankly, I'm there 2 or 3 times a week, and I never see any council members there. So I think it behooves us at this time to just experience it as a real place between now and the time you vote. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Bruce Baker. I live at 7724 Maple Avenue, and I'm here to express my personal support for what Margaret Boraimo and Denise Jones have just told you about rent stabilization and the changes that they want. I also want to point out that I'm wearing a sticker that says support renters, and there are many people in this audience wearing these stickers because and they're renters and non-renters alike. And we're wearing these, many of us wearing this because we all understand and believe that rent stabilization it has been the most effective policy for maintaining diversity and maintaining affordability in Tacoma Park. It helps make Tacoma Park what Tacoma Park really is. And I also want to say that we need to there's going to be some changes. I'm looking forward to seeing the presentation on housing development, the housing strategy going forward. And I hope that we can do things to improve the quality of the housing and maintain the affordability and maintain the diversity. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin O'Brien. I live on Ethan Allen Avenue. And I've been here for about two and a half years with my spouse, and we have a 1-year-old daughter, and I'm really excited about the Junction development. I've drafted a letter that I think affirms what I think most people in my neighborhood believe, and I wanted to just briefly summarize it. We have 3 main points. The first point is that overall, we're really excited about the prospect of this development, and we all really agreed with pretty much everything in the mayor's letter, and we really liked her vision. We think it provides an exciting opportunity for a community to gain a place where we can shop, mingle, eat, work, some good walkability. We also support efforts to work with NDC thus far and believe that overall their plan's heading in the right direction. We agree that some of the details of the design can be improved. For example, making more public outdoor space would be a good thing, but we should move forward with the project, which will involve more feedback from the community and the traffic study, of course. We also wanted to express support for the co-op. We support its existence. Many of us are members, or we at least shop there occasionally. And while it is a private business, it's a pillar of our community, but we note that the co-op has mounted a very strong campaign against the development. Mincing whatever words, that just seems to be what it is over a long period of time. And it's all related to a disagreement over how much asphalt we should leave for the purpose of their 18-wheelers turning around. And rather than shutting the development or shutting this process down or starting it over, we really want to see it move forward. We want them to make every effort to make the lay-by work as best as possible for the co-op. But we think that because many businesses in urban environments, including Ace Hardware, have made it work, that they can make it work too. And we want to see the co-op thrive, but we don't want to go to such great lengths to accommodate them that we shut down a project that has the potential to benefit our community. So we support moving forward with this contract, including deliverables such as the traffic studies and refining the design based on community feedback. And we have about 20 families from wards 2 and 3 that are going to be signing on to this letter. But because we're kind of the middle of the road people who aren't super passionate either way, we just kind of want to proceed reasonably. I think we kind of have a low turnout, but I do think this is an important voice in the conversation. And I'll be sending you that letter within the week. And as an individual, aside from the letter, I just wanted to urge the council to consider the racial equity framework moving forward.
You still have 30 seconds.
Okay. So currently, based on the report that Councilmember Tim emailed out, our city is only 45% white. It's 55% people of color. Already the co-op seems to serve primarily white homeowners, and I would really like to see this development be a place where that also serves people of color and lower income people who are really important residents of our community as well. And I say that as a white homeowner who does shop at the co-op occasionally. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carter Malcolm. I live at 7777 Maple Avenue, and I'm just here to support rent stabilization. Where I live, Tacoma Park is like a mixing bowl. There's so many different races, so many different people live here. And I fell in love with this place since I came about 35 years now I live in the area. And I must admit that it's a place where we want to be, where our kids feel pretty safe because the police is very effective down here. I noticed that if you call the police, it won't take long for them to get there to support you. hospitals close by, schools are good, and it's just an area where people want to live. But if we have to pay so much rent every year it raises the rent, we have to start cutting down on everything. Our kids can't get 2 slices of bread no more, they get 1 slice of bread now. Because every time you look around, the raises renting, and where people work, they're not getting any more money. And so you have to stretch. When that starts to happen, then you're going to find people start to get frustrated. When people get frustrated, people get ignorant. A hungry man is an angry man. That's where people get angry and start committing crimes, because they're not happy with the environment, because the rent situation is suppressing people. Every time you look around, oh my God, $60 more. Look at my job, I'm not getting $20 raise. You know what I'm saying? So this is what I'm talking about. I'm just asking to look into the situation. You're in position to do this, look in the situation and see if you can help us to pay less rent or keep the rent stabilized so we can live better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leah Goldstein. I'm a resident of Ward 2, and I'm a small business owner in the community as well. And I just wanted to voice my support for the project moving forward. I moved here 5 years ago looking for a vibrant and thriving, mixed-use, diverse community, and from what I've seen of the plans, it seems like the plans have been really thoughtfully developed. I think it's worth going back in and adjusting details, but from what I've seen, it's been the sustainability has been considered, and the just the public use aspect has been considered. And I hope that I'm also a member of the co-op and appreciate the co-op being there. I wouldn't want that to stand in the way, though, of the project moving forward, and I hope that it does. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Claire Fenton. I live on the 8300 block of Roanoke Avenue, and I'm here to support rent stabilization and code enforcement measurements. I'm an MCPS public school teacher, and I know affordable housing impacts my students. I see it every day, but it also impacts me. I'm concerned about where I'll live if my landlord decides to sell my building. I'm a good neighbor, and I'm a professional. I should be able to afford to live here. I appreciate Takoma Park because it's culturally and socioeconomically diverse. I've been priced out of neighborhoods in D.C., and I don't want to be priced out of Takoma Park. I also want to talk a little bit about code enforcement. So on my block, there's a vacant building next to mine that is just now occupied that was chronically overgrown. Trash is in the yard. There's overflowing trash on my street. There's rats. Over the course of the last 3.5 years, I've watched 2 little girls grow up into teenagers taking out their trash. And the way they take out their trash is one of them goes first with a stick and opens the trash can, and the other one throws the trash in, and they run away. So that's how bad the smell and the rats are on my block. I pay $1,200 a month in rent. My rent isn't cheap. I don't deserve to live this way, and I don't think anyone does. I think it's really important that Takoma Park be affordable, not just to a professional like me, but to all kinds of people. And I think that's what makes this place special. I want to stay here. I don't want to leave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Noel Nussbaum. I live on Manor Circle in Ward 3. I originally came about just kind of to watch some of the discussion about rent stabilization later. But I do want to speak to a couple of things. One is actually with the co-op. I think it's been a difficult process, and from what I've seen, there have been no side of the negotiation has been perfect. They've all, frankly, I'm a member of the co-op, but some of the things that in terms of their negotiation, I'm sitting here thinking, I know some of these people who are board members or whatever, they're involved in things like mediation in their professional lives, and they can't negotiate. NDC doesn't look all that much better, but I don't expect much more from a business. I think the council has been the grown-ups in the room, and you need to continue to be. And then, that's really all I have on that. And then on the rent stabilization stuff, when I got here, I was looking at this report that you're going to be looking at later. Not sure how it was created. It says something about a lot of people were interviewed, residents, renters, stuff like that. I don't recall hearing too much about this being created. But there are two recommendations here on amending the rent stabilization ordinance. I wanted to comment on them. The first one has to do with stabilizing the rent only for households up to 100% of median income. And I think that's a recipe for discrimination. You're going to have landlords discriminating in who they're renting to because they want to get market rent. And that's just too much of a balancing act to try and write it in a way that allows that and also keeps the discrimination from happening. It's not worth the attempt. The other is with the fair return on investment process. So I've always lived, in Tacoma Park in smaller rental buildings, so I don't have as much familiarity with some of the experience that you may hear from some of the others. But one thing I do see is that landlords are reluctant to do things that would, maybe they're not in code violations or whatever, but the places get pretty run down because they don't want to fix it up. They're afraid they're not going to be able to get their money back. And I want them to at least feel that they'll have a chance to get that so that they'll fix things up. And maybe there are other incentives the city can do, like pilots or other incentives like tax for certain types of improvements. So if the city could consider those, that'd be great.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Beaudet at 7012 Sycamore. I wanted to follow up on my comments from last week with regard to the top of Sycamore where it meets Ethan Allen. I actually spoke with one of my neighbors who lives right there. I don't know whether Licia spoke earlier this evening, but she said she was absolutely okay with Sycamore becoming either temporarily or permanently one way or closing it at that place in order to facilitate anything for keeping the co-op's deliveries going and making the whole area safer and better for traffic during construction. Also, she had a great vision that I wanted to express here, which is the view of, that's really the most residential area, adjacent to this new development. And her thought was to create, why don't we load the green space onto that side so that you potentially have like a stepped green area and the tallest part of the building going way over towards where the firehouse is. Another thing we discussed was inviting the Liberty Gas service station to join in this design process so that then there's also the possibility of including a pedestrian bridge, say building to building, across the junction, thereby eliminating issues with people crossing the street. And in addition to the green space, we were talking about, wow, wouldn't it be cool if there could be like a fountain, like in downtown Silver Spring, maybe over where the little junction kiosk is right now, or as part of that green space. Anyways, there's definitely more energy in the community for additional creative discussion and meetings. We also, we're talking about how we're sure that like the entire co-op membership has not been surveyed to, get all of the creative ideas that could potentially come out of it. We're all really still willing to meet and discuss this if NDC really wants to be responsive to the community. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Mary Jane Machui, Ward 2. I'm going to speak at this moment for parents of special needs adults, of which I'm the founder, because all this stuff about gentrification and rent control and having place to live hurts us the most, people who are disabled. Because we tend to, for one, I guess I'm complaining, I'm sorry, would have a lot more money if my son was not disabled. Because when you have a disabled child, I was told by a lawyer recently it could be $1 million if you have an autistic child for them to grow up and to pay for the aides and assistants. So, I mean, I bought a house here in 1985, luckily me and my ex-husband, and it was $69,990, and now it's assessed for over $300,000. When you talk about gentrification, it's not just the renters, it's the buyers. In my place, the black families are moving out in my area. I moved here because of that, because of the diversity, a diversity of income and race, and it's losing. It's all Caucasian, wealthy people moving in. And most of the time I don't feel welcome because they all talk about the kids going to college. And I'm sorry, I walked out the other day when there was a meeting because they were talking about their 3 kids going to college and how well they were doing. My only kid has autism, and he's lucky he will never be able to support himself totally the rest of his life. I'm sorry I walked out, but sometimes I just can't take it. And I'm sorry. I mean, I don't hate these people, but I wish people would be a little more sensitive to people like me. And I sent a copy of this How to Stop Gentrification article I brought up on the internet to the mayor and to Suzanne and maybe somebody else, housing office in general. So please read it. They're talking about community grants, community land trust, because it's not just renting. I would like to see more lower income people of color in my neighborhood coming in, not leaving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patrick Flanagan. I live on Elm Avenue, Ward 3. I've been here for 40 years. And I want to address something that I haven't heard mentioned yet. You all have received a lot of kudos and thanks, and I would join them for all your effort and your sincerity and your conscientiousness to take this on relative to, everything you do, but I'm thinking particularly of the junction. But what I want to do is put in a plea for, I don't know what your internal process is, but I know that to be successful in navigating your way between the pressures from the developer and the pressures from all of us, your constituents, that it takes a very strong and cohesive internal process. And I hope you're spending time with each other to sort of go through all this and to think about how you want to approach this and to understand where you're cohesive and where you're not, and to take the time in between your meetings with the developer to sort of reflect on what happened, where are they coming from, what are you going to do, how are you going to move forward, because the best of intentions can be defeated, by circumstance. And, not to be too martial about it, apologies to the peace advocate, but, when the best laid plans, when the shooting starts, go away. And so I hope, that you'll take the time to take care of each other and to stay in a process that keeps you able to represent us optimally and to have the least amount of wear and tear on yourselves as well, and that will hopefully come out in a good place. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, TJ Matthews, Lincoln Avenue, Ward 2. I joined the co-op originally in 1992, and when they were over in Silver Spring, I was on the board when they first came to the Tacoma Junction location, making an attempt to move there, and we were kind of told, you're a bunch of hippies, go away. It was 3 years after that they successfully convince them that it was the right thing to do. And we saw that transition happen, and the store in Silver Spring closed, and then they opened up a second location over off of Grubb Road over there, actually where I used to live. And that stayed open. I was in on the construction of that and did a lot of volunteer work there. And that store eventually closed as well. And so we saw that transition. And then the other thing we've seen is in Tacoma Park, we see a tremendous amount of transition. Businesses opening, businesses failing, empty slots all over town. And we've seen that over the past 20 years. And we've seen these transitions. And it would be disheartening and crushing if we lost the co-op in Tacoma Park. Could the co-op be in another location nearby, still in Tacoma Park? Maybe. I don't know what's happening with that gas station. I guess it's not a gas station anymore if they're not selling gas. Could the co-op be over there? I don't know where. I mean, I'm glad that some people are suggesting some other ideas. 53,000 square feet. Wow. That just kind of stunned me. And it doesn't look too bad on paper, but wow. And with the traffic, I mean, I don't know anybody who thinks the traffic is great at that intersection. You know, yell out now if you think it's good. It's going to get worse with all of that. And that's mind-boggling that we would proceed with that in hand. And yeah, the study's going to show that. So good luck. Thanks.
Any other public comments this evening?
Mark Sherman on Hancock Avenue. I speak to you tonight as a renter. I moved into the Carroll Gardens complex on Hancock Avenue in 2011. The first thing I tried to do was to organize the tenants. Mine was not the first attempt. There were attempts before me, and there have been attempts since. And I got to tell you, it's very difficult to organize tenants. My hat's off to those who have actually gotten further down the road than we ever did. It's very difficult, but it's essential, and I've long wondered what the city could do in addition to its existing efforts to support tenant organizing. Because here's the truth about those of us who live in a place like that. We don't really have any place to go. We can't move up to buy a house in the neighborhood. We're just kind of stuck there. And there's a phenomenon called aging in place, a subject on which I used to write as a journalist writing about aging issues. And that's what's happening. We're in that apartment building. We're getting older, and we're not going anywhere. We're aging in place. And so I encourage you to think more about what it means to age in place, because I did the math. I went on the city website, and on that website are the number of people who live in owner-occupied housing and the number of people who live in rental housing. I did the math. 43% of Tacoma Park residents live in rental housing. 43%. But we're not represented at that level on the council. I don't think ever have been. And Kay Daniels Cohen tried to encourage us in our efforts to organize. She said, you know, renters have as much of a stake in this city as anyone else, and they shouldn't feel like they can't plug in and be part of the process. So I just want to give a shout out to all the work that has been done by Cheer and all the people who spoke this evening. We are part of this city. We're not transient. We're here to stay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening? No other public comments? Okay, then we will now move on to council comments. Do you have any comments from council members? Councilmember Qureshi.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you all for being here tonight. I have to just do one business matter, and then I'll turn to everybody here. The stop sign at Westmoreland and the greatest street in Tacoma Park, 5th Avenue in the Pinecrest neighborhood. The stop sign is almost completely down. I don't know what happened since yesterday. Somebody might have hit it. My son might have kicked it. I don't really know. So if you could look into that. I just want to address two things this evening. As you may have heard, we were here till almost 2 o'clock in the morning last week for a very lengthy meeting to talk about this issue that nobody cares about called Tacoma Junction. And, you know, it got heated in here at times. And it's a very controversial issue in the community, and it brings out very strong opinions. As I always say, there's no shortage of opinions in Tacoma Park, and that's what makes it so awesome. But I want to talk just to one issue, which is, I think Mr. Flanagan talked about this, we do receive a lot of communications, and we communicate with each other a lot via text if we need to communicate about any number of issues. And I get hundreds of emails, and those hundreds of emails are just as reflective, if not show more diversity that we see here on any given night in the comments that are made. And I know Ms. Kern talked about 45 people coming out here and supporting one position or another. But I've received, and what's been really given me pause this week, a lot of emails from individuals who have expressed to me that they don't feel comfortable stating their position publicly. And what that means is, whether it be public in Tacoma Park could mean so many different things, right? You could be standing up here at the podium, but the public forum, the water cooler in Tacoma Park, is any given number of listservs in the community. That was sad to see. And these people aren't like, well, you know, I really support development, Rizzy, and I just don't want to say anything because I don't want to upset my neighbors who are co-op supporters. Or they don't all say, well, Rizzy, I'm a big co-op supporter. I hate development. I want this deal to die, but I don't want to say anything. Most people are actually right in the middle. I'm really battling with this issue. I don't want this parking lot to remain what it is. No business should necessarily preclude us from moving forward on making our community better and more walkable, and make the area more vibrant. But most of them say, yeah, I like this idea. Can you make it a little bit smaller? Can you just make sure you check 10 more times that the co-op really isn't getting pushed out on this one? Can you make sure you get more public space? So it's that pushback and that negotiation that you have charged the people up here, at least for another 3 weeks, to do. And I assure you that people do that. I mean, I've seen examples of emails going out on listservs with individuals calling out their own brother or sister who lives down the block for having some kind of financial incentive in the outcome of this deal. When you know who that person is, he's your brother or sister, your neighbor, you can just knock on his door, have him over for a beer or a chai if you're Pakistani. But I'm just urging my neighbors that as highly charged of an issue as this can become, don't forget, as one of my buddies told me today, and I apologize if this offends somebody, but this upcoming weekend is Howard Homecoming, which is the biggest party in D.C., whether you know it or not. I'm a proud Howard Law graduate, and it's my 10-year anniversary. So I'm texting with a lot of friends, and they're like, man, I heard haven't seen you in years, but heard you're on council. And I'm like, yeah, pretty cool, only a few more weeks. And they're like, well, what kind of issues do you? I'm like, well, why don't you check out a video from our last council meeting? And he did. His name's Abdul, and he is in development all over the developing world. And he told me to remind my neighbors in Tacoma Park that don't ever lose sight of the fact that we're dealing with first world problems. We're dealing with issues that we have the privilege to deal with. That doesn't minimize or trivialize your important points of view, but it's important not to lose sight of the fact that there's people who line up here who talk about they can't afford to live here. There's people who line up here who say their apartment or living conditions are deplorable. There are so many students, and I know this as a parent of an elementary school student, that go to Tacoma Park Elementary who cannot pay for lunch. So let's not kill each other over this first world problem. Let's kill each other over that stuff. At least it would be more worth it. So I really look at two people in the audience who are here, Keith Kasloff and Licia Merriman, who to me embody the reasoned approach that one should take on this issue about building dialogue, seeing all sides of the issue, and realizing that each of those sides are important for us to get to some kind of resolution. And I urge you to reach out to them, and they're holding a forum with some mediation between community members to really talk this issue through. So I'll leave it at that. Let's just be civil. Let's be cool, and we'll get through this. You have some great people up here, and you'll have even greater people in a few weeks. I just used great twice. It reminds me of somebody I can't stand. But so that's all I'll say. And I've been using this term pop off the last couple weeks. I'm not going to pop off. The last thing I will leave with, and Tim Mayle talks about this, and he gets me all nostalgic of, it's my last time around at council, and I want to say a few things. I've been saying more than I normally like to say to begin with this evening, but I'll say one thing. I'd like to focus my last few weeks on just recognizing people. You all look at this body up here, and sometimes you're like, man, I can't stand those people, or I can't stand that city government. But I promise you, the one thing that I've learned sitting up here for 2 years is that you live in a city with the greatest city staff that you can ever expect. And to me, the person who embodies that more than anything, because she's one of the reasons I joined the council, is Jessie Carpenter. She's basically involved in every single community committee and is that liaison. And then she's here with us till 2 o'clock. And tonight she brought down my materials because I'm always late. But, Jessie, I just got to say, it's been a pleasure to work with you. And I think that because of you, our city is so great. So thank you for that. But that's all I have.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. I had the opportunity last week to attend the event, which was through the Maryland Municipal League, where that wonderful plaque that Suzanne held up earlier, which was basically around the recertification of Tacoma Park as a sustainable community by the Maryland organization that oversees that, where that plaque was conferred, and we were, I'm not sure if we were the highest ranking, but one of the highest. We were the highest ranking.
By far.
And okay, so this wasn't one of those things where it was just everybody who participates gets a trophy. We actually earned it, and there is a document that the Sustainability Office put out summarizing all of the things that we've done, and I encourage people to go online and take a look at it because it really is incredible. And this reflects back to what I think my good friend Councilmember Rizzi, who did make a great set of comments, very, very great, was talking about, which is the staff that really does do a good job, and you wouldn't get an award like that without the staff doing a good job. The council sort of charts a course saying that we want to do things on sustainability, but it's the staff that actually implements that. So it was great to participate in that, and thanks for that. And also, I want to just say a couple of words, maybe not quite as long, to talk about the debate on the junction as well. And I'm just going to say, and I've written this in a couple of the emails I've sent around, I look at what's happening at the national level, and I think most people here probably agree with me generally on what they'd like to see there. But aside from that, there's just this really unfortunate trend where we see people at the national level in the political sphere, for want of a better term, demonizing the people that they disagree with. And I would never expect people here to check their passion at the door and to not fight for the things that they believe in. And I think local issues have always been the sources of passionate debate. But I don't want us, when we look and see what's happening nationally, to contribute to normalizing that behavior. And so as we continue in the next few weeks and really sticking up for what we think on all of these issues and not backing down just for the sake of it, but to actually try to understand where people on the other side are coming from, so that we can, as we were and are on sustainability, also be a model on how to debate contentious, tough local economic development projects like this as well. So thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Listening to my colleagues' remarks makes me feel all the more sad about the fact that I'm going to be stepping down, and I'm going to be missing my colleague on the right, who has been such a joy to sit beside, and so I for a lack of anything better to say, I'll just say I associate myself with his remarks. How's that? That covers a lot of things, but it's the truth. Last week, I had the opportunity to attend for one day on Thursday the Maryland Municipal League Fall Conference in Rockville, and it's amazing the amount of stuff you can soak up in just a few hours at that conference. There was what a large city forum, which is where actually the Tacoma Park fits into that category, believe it or not. Discussions on certain things like how members of the MML, which are people like us up here, from across the state of Maryland, feel about police presence in city council meetings. And so there was a healthy, interesting discussion about the pros and cons of that and that sort of thing. And it turns out that most of the city, various councils, seem to think that that's a good idea for what that may be worth. We also brought up, particularly myself, concerns about what we're doing about Airbnbs in our respective counties and municipalities. And I was alarmed, frankly, to hear some of the horror stories such as where people are buying up townhouses in a row and just when they vacate them, they just slice them up into rooming units and rent them out to Airbnb and charge high rents, which is destructive of affordable housing and destructive of neighborhoods. I know that the county council is addressing this, but I'm going to really ask that the new city council take a very careful look at what Montgomery County wants to do, which I'm sure they will, but also to decide whether or not the city itself needs to take some protective measures and what those criteria might be. There was also a roundtable for all the utility services in the state, WSSC, SHA, Washington Gas, and 4 or 5 other ones. I had the opportunity to speak with the director of the Maryland State Highway Administration, who you, Mayor, has spoken to. Was it Mr. Slater?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we chatted for a few minutes, and of course what I talked to him about was the SHA's ineptitude in regard to adjusting the traffic lights in Tacoma Junction, which is befouling the traffic in that area. And he was all ears and knew exactly what I was talking about.
He better. Sorry.
And assured me that he knew the problem and they were working on it and all of that. So at least it was comforting to know what you already knew, that this is high in this gentleman's mind, and if it's high, maybe there's hope. There was also an extended whole session on addressing the opioid epidemic in Maryland, and there were some fabulous speakers on that. I won't go into it, but there's a lot to learn and a lot to understand. Finally, the other thing I wanted to mention was the Diwali Festival that was held in Ward 6 on New Hampshire Avenue. This was the 3rd annual Diwali Mela Festival of Lights. And I learned from Melanie Isis, the executive director of the Crossroads Development Authority, who basically organized the thing herself with the help of a number of the Hindu temples. The city co-sponsored it, as did Prince George's County. The city did play an important role, the police in directing traffic and all of that. But she said that this place was so crowded and there were so many music performances that the thing that was supposed to end at 6 kept going into the darkness and was sometime after 7 or 7:30 before they finally finished and the crowds began to disappear. That something like 105 children who are in various dance schools in the Indian community were able to perform live in their costumes on this stage. That the line for the food that was being served there was still long when the food place closed. And that so it was a huge success, that vendors were very complimentary about the revenue, the sales that they made. And so I just I want people to know that we've got another festival on our hands now that it's for real and it's going to continue, and to encourage my colleagues to attend it in the future and show up and do whatever you can to support the Crossroads Development Authority. I don't think it's fair to expect one person. It's a one staff person in that organization. There is no other staff other than Miss Isis. She needs a lot of help, and if anybody's interested in volunteering for next year, it would be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Mail?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have sort of three somewhat disparate comments tonight, so just bear with me that I don't have a unified message to deliver with. I wanted to start off by saying there's an election, as we've heard from people in the audience and the council, coming up. And in Ward 2, there's three fantastic candidates. One of them was here earlier but has stepped out, but that's okay. There's a number of debates coming up. So starting this Friday night, 7 o'clock in the fire station is the first debate among the three candidates, just hosted by Ward 2 members asking questions, and residents will have a chance to ask questions. On Sunday night, 7 to 9 p.m., also at the fire station, is a debate hosted by youth, by 16 and 17-year-olds for youth in the city and anyone else who wants to come, obviously. But the idea is to focus specifically on questions and give an opportunity for youth to send in questions through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or showing up in person at the fire station as well. And then there's another candidate forum on Wednesday of next week. I think there's an event on Monday night that's maybe on Tacoma Radio that it will include Ward 2 candidates. And I'm probably missing some, but the fact that there's at least three happening before our next council meeting, I hope that people in Ward 2 have a chance to make it out to those events. I'm happy to provide more details on any of them, as our neighborhood association presidents, our city clerk, Jesse Carpenter, or anyone else. So that's my sort of first comment. There's lots of chances to understand who the candidates are, how they'll help you, and who to put, who you think you should put as your first and second choice, because you'll need two choices on your ballot in Ward 2. My second is that I wanted to just comment on, well, one of the things that people say to me is, because I'm leaving council shortly, not one way or the other, I'm definitely leaving council, is, you must be looking forward to it. Oh, what a burden. And then the other thing people say is, it's such a thankless job. And actually, neither of those are true. I'm not looking forward to it on balance. I will really miss council, and it's not a thankless job. People say thank you all the time. You get a lot of other things as well, but there's lots of thanks thrown in there. And Mr. Flanagan tonight, Patrick Flanagan, who spoke, I think it's the first time I've seen him in 6 years of being on council. And he chose his 3 minutes before the council to come and speak about kindness and working together, flow, and taking care of one another. And stuff like that is exceptional. Like what an amazing community we are, what an amazing species we are, that someone would use their 3 minutes to just basically say, be nice to each other. So I think of moments like that in service on council, which come up pretty frequently, as being treasures that I certainly don't get anywhere else in life. The other thing I'd say about council is, I don't know if any of you are athletes. I'm not. But I've tried at various points in my life to do sports, and one of the ones that had the biggest effect on me was rowing crew with 8 people in a boat. And there are these moments where you row because you're all supposed to be doing the same thing, and if you do the same thing, something different happens than when you don't do the same thing. Mm-hmm. There are these moments when you can actually feel it. You can actually feel the boat. It's a very spiritual experience. Literally, the boat sort of lifts out of the water. And you can feel your bodies, even though you can't see most of the people in the boat, doing the same thing, and you just feel the thing move. City council and this community are discussions about things like the junction. are in many ways the opposite of that. It's a cacophony of different ideas competing, but the outcome of the process is sometimes just as beautiful. It's not an orchestra, right? We're not playing the same tunes. We're not producing a symphony. There's no Mozart here. But the end product sometimes is really spectacular, and you feel it at the end of discussions that we've had, whether it's on community policing and trying to set a new direction, or it's on SafeGrow. We're talking about that, but the early struggle to put SafeGrow in place, or any number of other issues I've been part of up here. And there's just this spectacular moment where something is, you feel like you've made progress that was really hard, and you can feel sort of the community shifting with those things. So that's just been sort of an exceptionally exciting thing to be part of on council, and I will miss it dearly. And again, I just wanted to thank Mr. Flanagan, who sadly left, and I hope I see him again before 6 years pass, for those remarks tonight. Thank you.
I just have a couple of announcements. The Police Residence Academy is starting to take applications. They're due by December 1st. This time around, there'll be 12 sessions starting January 9th on Tuesday evenings. And there's a video on the city website that you can watch. As a short video, 5 minutes, that talks about the police academy. It's an opportunity for residents to work with our police department, talk to them about their jobs, why they do certain things, and it looked very exciting. And so, and everyone I know who did it highly encourages people to take part in it. I would like to extend a thank you to Bruce Baker and all the folks at Cheer who helped put on the Discovery Long Branch 5K this weekend. It was a terrific event. We had a great time, and I think the weather was perfect for a 5K, actually. It really was, so thank you for that. As Councilmember Mail said, there are moments in this job where you really get to feel great satisfaction and gratitude. And I just want to extend my thanks to the Public Works Department for two things. One is changing the parking signs that were on Maple Avenue that residents had been talking to us, Councilmember Siemens and I, about for a while. And then the other thing was Councilmember Siemens and I did a morning coffee at one of the apartments, and there was an older woman there who at first, it's like, no, everything's fine. And then we're like, are you sure? There's nothing we can do? And she's like, well, I really like going to that Taco Bell on New Hampshire Avenue, and I fell. And, whenever they put that light in, it's not working out. They need to go back there. And I went, and Councilmember Siemens did as well. And it wasn't just a little thing. It was incredible that State Highway left it in this condition. And I just want to thank our Public Works Department, because now it's fixed.
May
yes.
I just say
yeah.
Good. I would just like to point out that you said she was an older woman. You meant older than you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
In case she's watching.
In case she's watching. Yes, that's true. And then I just want to echo what my colleague said. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight, their comments on the junction. And I will just leave you with this Diwali saying, may peace and serenity fill your heart and home this upcoming year. And please carry that with you as we continue our conversations on the junction. And now I will turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I first want to just kind of pick up on something that Councilmember Mail just said. One of the things that I've enjoyed being in public service for a lot of years now is that the hard roads come to something, and you do feel in a difficult struggle over time, and you see things develop and changes and improvements take place. Ultimately, you feel good about it because it went through that whole process. And it's never fun to go through the process, but it is I think very reassuring about kind of hard democracy kind of at work that happens, and it is one of the things that gives me optimism all the time about the work that we do. Some quick items. The tree removal permit at 102 Geneva Avenue. Although we did follow the legal rules about the posting on the property, we do acknowledge that the website information was slow to get up. Nevertheless, there is a tree commission appeal on that, and so we've been working with the folks who had concerns about it to make sure that the tree commission does actually have their appeal at a time that's convenient also for those folks. So went through that. I think we got the information we need about the permit, the traffic calming requests on Fifth Avenue. So we're still working on that. Councilmember Qureshi. We talked for a moment about the Tacoma Park receiving the Sustainable Maryland Certified Award. It was our re-up after 3 years, and we are called the Sustainability Champion for Maryland. I want to specifically call out Gina Mathias for her hard work. The folks in the other communities are like, how did you get all those points? How did you do all that? And it's because it's been a community effort with the Committee on the Environment and the Council and residents, but it has to be packaged. And that's work, and she's really good at that, and I appreciate her efforts every day. Wanted to give, there's kind of a statement about an update regarding the Washington McLaughlin property in my notes. People who are interested in it can read it because it's kind of a legal description. But essentially, there is a legal case that's going to be going to mediation about part of the process, and we'll keep people posted. But I don't want to try to go through the legal description on this, and we do have it posted on the city's website also when people want to follow along under Dorothy's Woods. We do have also on the website information about Pepco tree pruning and where areas that will have tree pruning will be taking place. If you go on the project page on the website under utility work, we do have information on the areas that will be affected. And we're trying to be very careful about how we distribute information to affected property owners and others in the areas. So this is kind of general information on the website, but we're also doing a lot of individual outreach along these routes. Attached to my notes and posted on the agenda page under my city manager comments is the recommended process for possibly changing street names that have Confederate ties. And so that recommendation from the Commemoration Commission is attached, and I assume we'll be taking that up at some point with this council, with the next council. I wanted to also got included here some recommendations by staff on what to do in the city community center's back parking lot and the wooden steps that go up to Tacoma Park Elementary School, where we've done a little pop-up to see are there ways that we can not encourage kids to run across the parking lot, which is unsafe. And then we've had a little pop-up experiment and talking to people about it. We have a number of recommendations after that process has gone forward, which mean some of the recommendations are to take out the stairs, to install some speed bumps in the parking lot, to install a raised crosswalk along the Grant Avenue area, to put some stop signs, some parking stops in parking spaces, and to cut foliage back so we have clear walking areas on sidewalks. So I think there's a series of recommendations. I'm tending toward approving these recommendations, but I wanted to have the council comments if you've got any questions or concerns before we finally move ahead on it. It is something it's doable within our budget, but it is a change to kind of public property, and I'd like you to think about it. There was a community meeting about the Flower Avenue and Sligo Creek Parkway intersection redesign, and the comments on those plans can be sent to Public Works. If anybody didn't attend but wants to comment, that information also is on the website. We did have a discussion, staff had a discussion about the Tacoma Park Rec Center on New Hampshire Avenue and what might be involved in actually transferring that to city ownership. We have some additional steps, including an appraisal, a little bit more of research to come back to you about, but those conversations have been occurring, and so we probably in late November will have some information to share with the new council. We still have lots of positions open. So if people are interested in jobs, please look at the city website under careers. And we're getting close to seeing our first cut on the police chief applications. So I'm looking forward to that. Finally, Saturday through Wednesday, although I'll be here next Wednesday night, I'm going to be in San Antonio at the International City County Management Association Conference, as will Deputy City Manager Jason Danweber. He'll be out also the rest of the week. So I'll be still available by email and whatever, but I'm looking forward to a lot of the sessions that are there. I think they'll be really helpful for us. Any questions?
Great. Any questions for the city manager? Councilmember Mayo.
Yeah, 2 questions. Just to clarify, the McLaughlin School update.
Yeah.
The earlier update we had was that the city would not be part of the required mediation. This
Actually,
update
that
says
was
it
a
will.
mistake.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just apparently in the presentation, in the way that it was written, it was assumed that we were, and we clarified that yes, we will be.
Great. Thank you. And then during the meeting, the Flower Avenue Sligo Creek Parkway public meeting, the Public Works Director mentioned that there is a current pedestrian crossing that crosses Sligo Creek Parkway that is planned for closure, not by the city, but by the Capital Park and Planning Commission.
Okay.
And if the city manager could provide information on that in a future meeting, as well as potential avenues for either the city or residents to comment to the right people on that potential closure.
Okay.
I understand it's a safety issue. It's down near the very end of Sligo Creek Parkway near New Hampshire Avenue. But there was certainly some strong views expressed from residents at the meeting that the removal of that crosswalk will just lead to people walking along.
Is that opposite, like Charing? And
It's Glengarry, is that?
oh, at Glengarry, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just might be something that we want to try to follow up on if we can.
Okay.
And just make sure there's a clear plan for pedestrians if it's not to cross there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I think that that crosswalk was installed very recently because the Park and Planning was rebuilding the area that caved in and forced the closure of the hiker-biker path. And when they were, when we had all those heavy rains, that whole area collapsed.
Yeah. I'll
and they
look
had to put some crosswalks so that people could
Right.
find their way past where all the construction was.
We'll
and
look,
it may
we'll look
be
into
that
all
once
the
now
details.
that it's there, it may be that it's desirable to keep it. I'm not commenting on the merits. I'm just giving context.
Look into that.
Okay. Great. All right, let's move on to our voting session. Our first item is the first reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 city election. Does the city clerk have anything to say on that, or should?
I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
pretty straightforward.
Okay. Would someone like to move that?
So moved.
Councilmember Mail, second. Councilmember Seans. Any questions or comments? Since all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No, that's done. Now we have a first reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act to add neonics to the list of restricted cosmetic lawn care pesticides. We had a work session on this a couple of weeks ago. I think the language we discussed then is the same language as is included here in the first reading ordinance. So
I do have one
yeah.
comment.
Okay.
You will see it's not on this cover sheet, but it will be on the second reading, a revised racial equity impact statement. Because one of the things that it was put on this one, it was that the ordinance would affect all residents of the city equally. But the fact of the matter is that since under the state law, neonics can only be applied by certified pesticide applicators, those tend to be entities that would be hired by an apartment building or an institution, that kind of thing. So not passing this could then more likely hurt people of color living in apartment buildings and that kind of things. So we wanted to put that kind of language in here.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
I'd like to move it.
All right. Councilmember Siemens move it. Do I have a second?
Yep.
Councilmember Schultz. Any other discussion on this or questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Next, the third voting item is a resolution expressing the council's position regarding the proposed additional northern bridge crossing. This was a work session we had late last week. It's regarding, I'll just give people an update. On July 19th, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation Planning Board voted to accept for further study 10 initiatives proposed by its long-range plan task force. This included a new northern bridge crossing over the Potomac River as a multimodal corridor and new express bus services connecting existing activity centers in this multimodal corridor. We received a petition by a number of residents in Tacoma Park to ask us to take up this issue and to have a resolution that would express the council's opposition to the study and the inclusion of this new Potomac River Bridge crossing in the Transportation Board's long-range plan. And so that is what we have in front of us. Councilmember Schultz, did you have a question before I ask this for it to be moved?
I'd just like to have a time to comment.
Yeah, that's fine. Anyone have any questions before I asked it to be moved? No? All right, so this is a resolution. Who would like to move it?
So moved.
Councilmember Mail, who second? Councilmember Qureshi. Councilmember Schultz, the floor is yours.
I just want to say that they're looking for unanimous support on this. In my conversations with people who've served on the Transportation Planning Board, makes me persuaded that it's not something that I want to join with my colleagues on. I do think that the Transportation Planning Board ought to have the liberty to conduct a long-range study of all the options for moving people, whether it's by vehicle or by surface rail, like a Purple Line, or any other means. Because until you have discussed and eliminated all the possibilities and narrowed them down to the best ones, you really haven't done a comprehensive analysis. And my feeling is that inevitably there's going to be interests for pursuing an outer crossing by a highway, which personally I would oppose. But the idea of an outer beltway, whether it's on the western side of the city or the eastern side of the city, is going to be there for a long time. And the sooner we get that study done and over with and be able to compare the cons as well as any possible pros of doing it, the easier it's going to be able to have a complete, thorough discussion of the whole thing. And I just don't see any reason, a logical reason, not to include something like this in a study. It's all it is a study. It's not that the Transportation Board, as I understand it, wants to advocate for this, or that anybody in the Council of Governments necessarily wants to advocate for it. But it seems like it's something that needs to be included in a discussion, so that if you want to be able to exclude it in the future, then you've got the reasons that you need to do it. And so that's why I support the Transportation Planning Board and will not support this resolution.
Councilmember Mail?
Thank you. I plan to vote in support of the resolution, but I just wanted to explain some context for that. Montgomery County has a number of things that it has done, has exceptional policy over 50, 100, 200 years. One of the things that Montgomery County is fairly unique in the country in having is our agricultural reserve. And what that has been over decades is a trade between higher density, smart growth in today's terminology, but different words when this was passed decades ago, higher density, concentrated development along corridors in the southern part of the county where we are, in exchange for land protection up county. So when we think of things like the corridor plan on New Hampshire Avenue corridor, sector plans, we look at, if a developer is to put bike stations and better sidewalks in, those are exchanged for, more stories on the building or other kinds of things that allow them to get more revenue. And it's sort of a win-win. And that's on the site. But the agricultural reserve in the county is on a macro scale. It's an exchange for development in clusters, in dense zones within the county. We've protected this large reserve of open space, of green space, of farmland in the county. And every route that's being discussed seriously for this would require violating those protected areas. So first you'd be extinguishing the easements, the land, but through eminent domain or otherwise, the protection on these places that were set aside in exchange for development down here, in exchange for things that developers got down here. And then almost, at least, is it a law? I don't know. It's like gravity, right? It's just a theory. But when you build a road, you get development, right? You put a big new highway through that helps people get from point A to point B, and you get a gas station, and you get a repair shop, and you get restaurants for people to eat at and pee at, and you get development, right? It's inevitable. Put that in conjunction with the fact that we have lots of things we'd like the Transportation Planning Board, the region, the DC region, to spend. It's the money that it gets on, like transit issues here, congestion, the metro, rapid bus transit, improvements on New Hampshire Avenue. And so I'm just personally not interested in Tacoma Park taking a position for something that's destructive of one of the exceptional things about Montgomery County, largely just benefits potentially Gaithersburg or very distant communities in the county, and probably hurts us and our residents in terms of future investments. So that's why, this is not an issue that hasn't been studied in the past. It has been studied in the past. So from that perspective, I feel really confident saying I'm looking forward to passing this.
Great. Councilmember Schultz,
I'm just going to say is that this is a multimodal study, and why do we want to eliminate the possibility to consider high-speed rail? And that would be eliminated if you don't take that as possibility under consideration.
Thank you. Any other comments on this one? Thank you. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
So it's 5-1. All right. The next is a resolution providing for appointments to the Tree Commission. Would someone like to move the resolution?
Move it.
Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember Qureshi, second. Councilmember Kovar.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Oh. Yes, this is a little bit of an unusual situation in that it's one of the times when two appointments expired, and 3 people have applied, including one who's seeking a reappointment, and that happens to be Colleen Cordes, who's someone I know well, who's from Ward 1. In this case, since I'm someone who has advocated in the past for periodic rotations on committees, and we do have another Ward 1 person on there, I have agreed to support the 2 new people who'll be rotating on, both of whom are very well qualified for the position. I just want to say that Colleen is somebody who has stepped forward. She had volunteered not just for the Tree Commission, but in a number of other ways, been a very active member of the committee. And I just want to pay tribute to that and to recognize the work that she has done as an important member of the community. So I will say that, and thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we have our new Tree Committee members. Now we will move on to our work session. This is a presentation of the draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan.
We have Sarah Daines, the Director of Housing and Community Development here. She will introduce it.
Tonight we'll be receiving a presentation of providing an overview of the preliminary draft of the Tacoma Park Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. If you recall, the Council authorized the undertaking of a community-wide strategic plan earlier this year. The primary focus was to be on how the city can work to provide a range of housing options for residents of varying incomes and to advance its interests in preparing to respond to future economic development opportunities. The Cloudburst Group and its partners Fourth Economy and Mullen Lonergan Associates were retained to develop the plan and will be presenting the preliminary recommendations this evening. Included on the city's website, if you're interested in seeing the work that's been done to date, is the preliminary plan itself, the data analysis, and the SWOT analysis. And those are all on the city's project page. Before I turn the podium over to Emily for the presentation, I just want to reaffirm with the City Council that this is an initial draft. We welcome your feedback on the recommendations that are included in the plan and that you'll see this evening. We're also going to be hosting 2 open houses to solicit input from the community. The first is on Tuesday, November 7th, and that'll be upstairs in the 3rd floor between 6 and 8 p.m.
So you can vote, and then you can
vote
share your thoughts.
and then come up and share your thoughts with us. The second is the following week on Monday, November 13th, and that'll be at the CDA boardroom on New Hampshire Avenue. The feedback you provide this evening and the feedback we get from the residents will help finalize the plan. From here, we're going to go and develop an implementation plan, and the plan itself will be presented for council consideration early 2018. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily Brown. Emily is an economic development strategist with the Fourth Economy, and also in the audience are... Got to get the right side here. Jerry Paytas, who is the Vice President of Research and Analytics with Fourth Economy, and Benjamin Strum, who is an analyst in the Housing and Community Development section of the Cloudburst Group.
Mayor, before Ms. Dane sits down.
Well, everybody has questions for you.
Okay.
Sorry, Ms. Dane.
Hi. I'm sorry. I'm out of breath for some strange reason.
You're excited about getting the plan done.
I think it's like running around trying to find people, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to check to make sure we're going to put the forums in the rolling agenda.
Yeah, we
can do that. We finalized the locations this afternoon. So,
All right. And what was the time of the second one? I didn't hear
they'll both be at 6:30, and we'll keep them open until 8, or excuse me, 6 until 8 p.m.
6 to 8. Okay.
I've got the dates and the locations and the times on the city's website as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do a lot of social media, spreading the word as well.
Okay. Any other questions? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. As Sarah said, my name is Emily Brown, and I'm an economic development strategist with Fourth Economy. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to hear from everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people out on a late night, on a school night, too. Yeah. So we'll be running through the draft plan and look forward to hear your feedback. Pardon me. There we go. Okay. So this plan had a 3-part process. We've talked to many people in the community. I've talked to some folks on council. I've talked to many folks in your community, as well as Cloudburst and Mullen and Lonergan. And we heard a lot of different things from the feedback and from the data that we did. First, we provided a data analysis, which can be found on your website. And then we also provided a SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. From these 2 extensive presentations, we then created the strategic plan, which we're providing to you tonight. And all of those can be found on your website. Just to kind of go over the process and the products, the housing and economic data analysis, it compared Tacoma Park to the state, to Montgomery County, and then to specific census tracts around the area, just to give us a little bit of a better idea of not just on a state level or a wider level, but a little bit closer in. Our key findings from that was that Tacoma Park is home to a large amount of families with a high level of income and education, generally. That you have a growing senior population, that roughly 32% of Tacoma Park households earn less than minimum annual income to afford a rent-stabilized apartment or to purchase a home. And we did find that the largest employer is the Washington Adventist Hospital, which will be moving, so that'll cut down on jobs. And we also found that Tacoma Park is what we and I'm sure many of you can recognize as a somewhat of a bedroom community, that there's lots of people coming into Tacoma Park to work, lots of people leaving, but only about 311 residents live and work within the city. There's plenty more data where that comes from in the extensive presentation. SWOT analysis, this was interesting to dig down into. For the strengths, weaknesses, and threats, I've split it out into both housing and economic development, and then opportunities kind of intersected. So strengths in housing is that there's wonderful programs here. Your staff does a great job of really paying a lot of attention to housing, addressing affordable housing. And we found that, as someone mentioned earlier, that there's a even mix of renters and owners. In economic development, we found that there's an increasing population. A lot of people are moving to Tacoma Park. It's a very progressive place, vibrant commercial areas, and you have some benefits of having an enterprise zone designation, which is a state incentive. Weaknesses, we found this on both economic development and housing, that there's a lack of developable land. And in housing, there's a little incentive for landlords to improve properties. In economic development, we found, as council members have pointed out, that there's a lack of interjurisdictional cooperation. We did some delving into the personal property tax, and then we found that there's some reticence from property owners to redevelop properties, whether those are aging properties or vacant properties. Opportunities, these are intersected between housing and economic development. Obviously, the purple line is a major opportunity. The Washington Adventist Hospital and what will become of that development. And then there's the opportunity for increased collaboration between the city and the jurisdiction. Threats for housing, aging stock, and rapidly increasing prices. And then the need for accessible senior housing. In economic development, we found that there was disparate levels of educational attainment and loss of jobs. And again, this is much more in depth on the website. So when we're looking at the strategic plan, we came up with 6 types of recommendations, and I'll go through those. We incorporated housing and economic development into the strategies, and we're going to be addressing those 2 major opportunities / shocks that I mentioned earlier, Purple Line and the hospital. We also were privileged to work very closely with your staff, and they, in addition to our engagement with community members, community leaders, and the staff, we found that the generic definition of economic development, which is typically it says it up there, but I would say it's jobs, 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 doesn't really fit here. We worked with the staff to come up with something a little bit more appropriate for this area, assisting the City of Tacoma Park's residents in gaining employment access, providing them with decent and safe living places to live, and ensuring that the city tax base continues to perform well in order to support existing programs that contribute to quality of life. So this is really centered around the idea of livability. This is some context. It's included in the plan. In looking at, as I said, the purple line is up there. Some other things to consider is that there's limited space for development. There's limited space for commercial development, for residential development. And we also found that both the economic development efforts and the housing efforts need a bit of strategic direction. There's a lot of good effort being put in on both sides, but they just need to be streamlined a bit. And affordable housing is really important to the city's identity. It really is important to preserve and expand this, and many of our recommendations focus on that. We'd also just like to point out that there are 2 competing goals that we found. And the implementation of one goal can mean that it's working a little bit against the other goal. One goal is to redevelop the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads and New Hampshire Avenue corridor. The other is to retain local, low-price businesses and to retain populations in those areas. So our approach has been to think of ways that we can balance those two goals. And I hope that you'll see that in our strategies tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Paitis, who did some analysis of what changes the purple line will bring. And he'll go into a little bit about the property values.
Thanks, Emily. And I want to point out, we are taking the perspective of this, and as Councilman Qureshi brought up, the problems you're facing are first world problems. This is not an area where, we work in some places like Gary, Indiana, and places that have serious economic challenges. You face some opportunities and you face some challenges and some things that will challenge your quality of life, but you come at this with a lot of resources and a lot better position than a lot of other communities. And we also, consider in this, one of the residents earlier brought up the point about aging in place. That also happens to the housing stock and to the real estate in the community. That can age in place as well. So as you have these development opportunities, if you don't allow for some redevelopment, that housing stock, that physical stock ages in place. And in some cases, now sometimes those old houses, can appreciate in value and they become really nice. Other times when they fall into disrepair, you get into a cycle of disinvestment. And then the place can very quickly fall apart all at once. So if you aren't keeping things up to date and if things aren't being redeveloped, you can get into a bad situation. So you want to act now while you're in that position of strength. The purple line is going to be, a major potential opportunity and challenge for Takoma Park. In looking at what's going on, certainly the studies that have been done from the technical report and the impact statements around the purple line demonstrate that they're expecting to see some employment shifts here and that there will be some residential impacts. All the literature that I've reviewed, suggests that we're going to see some appreciation of property values here in Takoma Park. All the factors that contribute towards transit and this high-speed transit increasing property values are present here in Takoma Park. Very few of the factors that would decrease property values are present. So both that technical study and the literature talk about price increases that could happen in the 40% range. So we looked at what would happen just if you got that 40% increase, what would happen if you had a 20% increase. And this is looking exclusively for now at the rental properties within a half mile. This represents about 25% of all the rental properties in Takoma Park. You would see some, even with a 20% price increase, you would see some loss in affordable housing units. If you got to that 40% increase, we would see some significant decreases in the affordable housing units. So you would see a loss of several hundred units for people in the incomes of 40 to 49,000. This area does not have some of the lower value or some of the homes that are some of the rental units that are affordable for lower income people. But you would see a big shift in terms of the affordability that would challenge people. And when we start to look at this, one of the primary tools you have is the rent stabilization, but there are some other tools that we looked at and are recommending in the toolkit. If you only do the rent stabilization, that can really start to put you into that disinvestment cycle. If the property owners aren't able to increase their rents, there's no incentive to make the maintenance and make the upgrades. You'll keep the affordable units, but at the expense of lower quality units. So you'll be forcing those lower income residents to live in lower quality units. And I know that's also something we don't want to see happen. So we think, we want to balance that rent stabilization with some other programs that Emily's going to talk about of how we can have a more holistic picture of what we can do. So currently, other than the rent stabilization, you have few existing tools. But as we look to redirect investment to have a more controlled upgrade of this area, you can also maintain affordability. So some of that is looking at how can we create some incentives and balance some of that with funds for affordable housing. How can we leverage the existing enterprise zone program? What are the things to do around improving the quality of place, the bike, pedestrian, and transit, and improving the walkability? With the increased transit access, one thing you do get is it does make, even though housing costs may go up, if people are able to use that transit and not buy a car, they're getting some offsetting savings that help make the community more affordable. And we're based in Pittsburgh, which does not have the transit access you guys have here, so we're forced to have the car and all the extra expense. That's a real benefit to the folks here. And then there's some other recommendations around marketing that really address on the business side, because that's the other aspect. You can have the residential gentrification. You can also have things happen on the commercial gentrification. So we're recommending a business improvement district. That's the bid here. And then how you can collaborate with Montgomery County Economic Development on some efforts. So I'm going to turn it back to Emily to talk about those.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, so we'll get into the specific recommendations. Overall, we had 6 kind of buckets. The first was increasing economic development capacity. The second is business and investment attraction. Third, business retention and expansion, entrepreneurship and small business support, workforce development, and preservation and expansion of housing options. So a lot of these are overlapping, and we'll kind of go into that as we go along. Increasing economic development capacity is really important. We're recommending specifically a bi-county business improvement district along the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads and New Hampshire Avenue corridor, and we're also recommending increased capacity at the city level. To go into the bid, first of all, there's been some legislation that makes creating business improvement districts in Montgomery County easier to do. We're suggesting this because there's a lot of small businesses along this corridor that would benefit from increased maintenance of the area. We've heard some complaints about safety. We've heard some suggestions that things could be, made nicer. That if there was an entity in charge, they would have a little bit more control over how the area looked, more marketing ability. A business improvement district would be able to keep an inventory of available properties and market those properties, to work with developers who are coming into the area to figure out how to develop those properties. And then it could coordinate with existing coalitions that are focused on Purple Line development, such as the Purple Line Corridor Coalition out of the National Smart Growth Center. On the city side, we're recommending to establish an economic development unit within the city. We know that there's already activities that are happening in economic development, and we support those and think they're good, but it could be a little bit more focused. A position that could lead streamline implementation of various economic development plans, programs, policies, incentives, and services, kind of be that hub for all economic development activities. This person would serve as, or this unit would serve as the city's liaison with the bi-county bid and existing groups. This person would also do business retention and expansion, and then also work with institutions of higher education to see if, or the workforce system that exists as well, to bring training opportunities to the city. As you can see, a lot of the recommendations that fall under increased economic development capacity are kind of spread throughout the rest of the recommendations. We're anticipating that these two capacity levels on the bid side and the city side would kind of carry out many of these recommendations along with the existing city staff. So to go into business investment and attraction, in Tacoma Park, we understand that many of the commercial properties are zoned for residential as well. So any strategy that would try to bring in more commercial and retail investment is also going to be bringing in more affordable housing if you structure it that way. So an aspect of business attraction strategy is to work with developers to create new mixed-use spaces that house business in retail and office space, as well as market and affordable housing. So specific recommendations here. I'll read through these and then go into a few of the more meaty ones. Infrastructure improvements, improving the walkability, the pedestrian environment, as well as bike and transit. Possibly establishing a special taxing district, as was done in White Flint. There's an opportunity to grow the Tacoma Park Housing Fund, or Tacoma Park Housing Reserve Fund, pardon me. And part of this would be assessing a higher property tax on vacant structures. Someone spoke about this earlier today, and we think it's a really important step in preserving affordable housing, which is creating a community land trust. The ability to partner with the Washington Adventist Hospital to develop senior housing on campus, along with other uses. Utilizing benefits provided by the Enterprise Zone, which is along the Tacoma Langley Crossroads and New Hampshire Avenue corridor. Promoting higher density development in targeted areas, and then marketing the development opportunity in that enterprise zone. So a special taxing district, this is kind of a recommendation offered. We had originally thought that we would suggest tax increment financing or tax, and we know that that's not really palatable to this area. So looking at different mechanisms for raising money to improve investment or infrastructure. The special taxing district has been done in Montgomery County already. It levies a property tax to fund transportation and infrastructure improvements on property owners, unlike bids, which levy a tax on businesses. In White Flint, the property values are higher. They have a pretty high level of tax, $100 for 10 cents for every $100 of assessed value. It's on properties that are within 0.5 miles of their metro stop, but not apartment buildings. So there's a suggestion that some buildings or some level of businesses in Tacoma Park could be left out of this tax. So we know that this is a strategy that you'd have to work very closely with Montgomery County on. It's kind of a big lift, but it would provide the opportunity to do some infrastructure investment. The Tacoma Park Housing Reserve Fund, we already know that this is a priority. We know that you've invested in this already, and I think that this is a really important one to continue to invest in, because this is what will give you the leverage to really encourage affordable housing to take place here. We suggest that the city think of how to continue to fund this. One suggestion is the increased property tax on vacant properties. Another idea could be the percentage of budget contributed to the reserve fund every year. Creating a community land trust. This has recently been made easier through the Affordable Housing Land Trust Act of 2010. The benefits of creating a community land trust is that it takes the cost of the land out of the development equation. So the community land trust owns the land, the developer builds on it, and then it must be sold to another owner who can pledge affordability. We also are suggesting this idea of partnering with the Washington Adventist Hospital to develop a plan for senior housing on campus. Now, when we spoke with the representatives of the Washington Adventist Hospital, they hadn't really thought about any residential usage there. It didn't seem like they were really committed to an idea when we spoke with them. I'm not sure if there's been more suggestions made. But the idea of having senior housing at this site is useful because, one, it's one of the only developable parcels in your community. Two, it's centrally located, and there's already some infrastructure there that would be beneficial to senior housing. So to move on from business attraction and investment, there's this idea of business retention and expansion. What are we doing to make sure that the businesses that are here already have the chance to stay here and have the chance to expand here? We see this responsibility being taken by the Economic Development Unit within the city, as well as the proposed bid. And this would include large-scale outreach to businesses in the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads, New Hampshire area, and Flower Avenue area, through business surveying, community meetings, especially as the Purple Line comes to fruition. Secondly, I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion about this. This came up a lot in our discussions, is the review of the personal property tax. Tacoma Park is one of the only cities to levy this tax at such a high level. And in a memo that was written to council in 2015, it kind of laid out the administrative issues with this tax. The tax is only paid by 22% of businesses. Some businesses are paying the tax, and others are not. This is not to call out any administrative responsibility for the city. It's a joint effort, as we understand, between the city and the state. But we suggest that in order to address these problems, you suspend the tax, and this will also help businesses in the area that's affected by the Purple Line as that construction happens, and then to consider lowering the personal property tax. To move on to another bucket here, entrepreneurship and small businesses. We found that businesses in Tacoma Park, small businesses that we talked to, said that it was difficult to find somewhere to get a foothold here. There's some great initiatives that are happening, farmers markets and things like that. Hearing about the Diwali Festival, we were talking about how that could be a great opportunity for small businesses to get some exposure. So things like incubators, markets, low-cost office space, and co-working should be encouraged. Also working with businesses to expand their knowledge of financing options, banks, and financing options that exist at the city and county level. And possibly working with businesses who are new in town to let them know about regulations that are specific to Tacoma Park, about the personal property tax, et cetera. Again, this would be a responsibility of the increased economic development capacity. Workforce development, we realize it's really important to provide affordable housing to preserve that as much as possible. In tandem, there needs to be an effort to improve the quality of life of people living in that housing. And one way to do this is through making it easy to take classes, to become fluent in English, to take college classes, to access resources through WorkSource Montgomery. There might be an opportunity to offer these classes, for example, at the rec center, or I know that there are many classes offered here at the community center. Just making those things available, known, and working to improve that aspect. And then finally, the preservation and expansion of housing options. We've worked closely with our colleagues at Mullen and Lonergan to come up with these examples. And I'll read through this list, but then also dive a little deeper into ones that would be especially important to kind of consider. Amending the rent stabilization ordinance, as my colleague Jerry talked about. Modifying the city's pilot program. Making the city's emergency assistance program available to refugees and immigrants who often do not have the capacity to provide a down payment or can't provide proof of citizenship. Aggressively enforcing rental licensing program requirements. Assessing a higher property tax on vacant structures. This is in there twice. We feel pretty strongly about it, and it fits into both attraction and housing options. Exploring the feasibility of nonprofit management organizations, modifying the tenant opportunity to purchase program, modifying the homestretch down payment assistance program, applying for state home program funds for rehabilitation, continuing the tenants' rights course and the landlord-tenant mediation activities, and then encouraging accessory dwelling units. when I'm listing these things, I know that these are kind of core programs of your community, and in a lot of times we're suggesting expansion or streamlining of these programs, just to kind of give a sense of what we're approaching here. So first, amending the rent stabilization ordinance. What we see currently is that the process is very complex, and that the stabilized rent is attached to the unit regardless of the resident's income. So we have two recommendations here. One is to reduce the complexity. This would encourage reinvestment, especially for property owners who have a smaller portfolio. It can reduce the administrative burden via tools such as online forms. And it can also spur good behavior, such as improvements to control energy usage. Second, determining a target percentage under 100% median income for buildings that are rent stabilized. Neither Fourth Economy nor other consultant friends could really come up with what that would be for you, but having a kind of threshold where you would want a population to meet that under 100% median income would keep a building mixed use, and then it would also possibly generate higher income for property owners, which would then facilitate renovations. Modifying the city's pilot program. This is one of those recommendations where we're really suggesting that it just needs a little bit more tightening. Right now, the pilot program exempts all or part of real estate taxes assessed on affordable housing developments. And what we found is that there's no real systematic review, inventory, or approval processes which the city can appropriately manage to oversee the full impact. So we're suggesting that a database of properties and property owners benefiting from this program be established. And we don't think this would be difficult to do. You could collect this from the applications that are made to this program. So this would just give you an idea of the impact that the program is having. This idea of aggressively enforcing rental licensing program requirements, this is something that we see in communities all across the United States. There are some great landlords, there are some people who really care about their tenants, and then there are some people who are not great landlords, and this targets them. Problem properties that can be mitigated by graduated licensing fees for problem properties, so every time they're kind of dinged, increasing that fee. Higher maintenance restrictions for repeat offenders, and then more frequent inspections for those repeat offenders. Modifying the tenant opportunity to purchase program. This is such a great program, and we support it as in the spirit of the program, but we want to make sure in our recommendation that this can be continued. Right now, when an owner refinances their property, or when the property is transferred from one affordable developer, affordable housing owner to another, then that triggers the tenant opportunity to purchase. We feel that the idea behind this program is that we want affordable housing in this area, in this building, to continue. So unless the owner were to sell to a market rate property owner, then the opportunity to purchase shouldn't really be available. And then also modifying the home stretch down payment assistance program. Right now, the home stretch down payment assistance offers $10,000. The analysis from M&L found that the median price of the home is significantly higher than what you can purchase with that. And also, Montgomery County offers a similar program. So we said either expand this program, make it a much larger down payment, or stretch the city's funds by partnering with a bank, or consider a soft second mortgage program in which the city is basically a guarantor for home purchasers. And that is my presentation.
That's it?
That's it. That's all you have to do.
Great. All right, so we'll open it up then for discussion. Does anyone want to start? All right, Councilmember Schultz, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to extend my compliments. You've managed to put together ideas, a cornucopia of ideas, and get your hands wrapped around this city in 6 months that has taken some of us absolutely years to kind of figure out and get to. And the key, one of the things is that, well, some of these ideas are ones that some of it as individuals have talked about on this council and prior councils. What we're getting here in this, which is this final report here is a 26-page document, is getting all these things in one place, in one document, so that we can begin to sort of comprehend the scope of possibilities and then can begin to sort them in terms of what seems practical and given our limited resources and some of the constraints that a town like ours faces. And so that just in itself is a good thing. I have some questions that others may have, but I don't want to dominate or take over too much of the conversation because I'm anxious to hear what my colleagues feel. I'd also say that there's a lot of stuff in here to be digested, and you may not get all the feedback. I'm sure you won't this evening. But for example, you talk about a community land trust. I've heard of those things. I don't have experience with them. But I'm wondering if you couldn't go into a bit more of how a nonprofit organization might want to end up owning land that somebody else would actually develop. And it's just not clear to me from the text that I'm reading here. And by the way, I read every page of every report from beginning to end more than once, and I really appreciate the effort. But go ahead.
Sure. So I will begin by saying that I am not an expert in community land trust. That was more a recommendation from our colleagues at M&L. I'll do my best to explain that.
Sure.
Community land trusts, as I understand it, are groups of people who own land as a nonprofit entity. And oftentimes that land is blighted or vacant beforehand. A community land trust takes that over, that blighted property, either through purchase or, in some cases, just the city takes that property on if it falls into disrepair, and then it's transferred over to the community land trust. Then the CLT kind of acts as a leaser of the land. So they lease it out to someone who wants to build on it, and that building is created, and instead of purchasing the land, they're paid a rent. That significantly decreases the funds that the developer needs. So they're just building the building. They don't have to assume the property. When that property is sold, the land is held by the community land trust, and the building is transferred to the next owner. There are some, I think, restrictions around what kinds of buildings. If you are the land trust, the holder of the land, then you can put some restrictions around what kind of building can be built there.
I can add just a little bit. The hardest part is getting them started, and there's a lot of different models, so you can tweak it in a lot of different ways. But so if you have existing property owners and then trying to convert that to a land trust, that's harder. People have to agree to basically give up their property rights. There's not a lot of places where that happens. But Tacoma Park is a little different than a lot of places, so you may be able to do that here. It's easier to do when you have blighted properties or things that have gone to treasurer's sale or abandoned ownership. Then you can start to get those and turn them over to a nonprofit. But it's getting that started, the seed money for that nonprofit, where does that come from? Getting that seed money together. Those are all that's the tough part, is that initial getting it started. And then once you have it, you can operate it a number of different ways.
We have a couple of properties that quickly come to mind along New Hampshire Avenue, 6530 New Hampshire, which is a vacant office building that's been boarded up for at least 15 years. It's currently in the private ownership. We had thought about trying to get it developed into a business incubator, but that failed. It's still possible, but that's the sort of thing that would happen. We've also got the Washington McLaughlin property, which is an extraordinary property that has huge potential, but it's let's just say it's underdeveloped and leave it at that. So that's something that I think is we want to be able to we want to be able to consider. I'd like just to turn the mic back to anybody else here while I think about other questions that I may want to ask.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you both for the presentation tonight and for all the work you put into this document. I just have a couple of simple questions, just trying to understand the document and not go much further than that, and probably not get that far tonight. On the charts where you were showing the loss of affordable units with the purple line coming in, that says in the vicinity. So those are those blue census tracts that were laid out on the map, or is it just some section of that that's over near the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads?
Yeah, it's in the block groups within a half mile. Yeah, it's the block groups within a half mile of the station within Tacoma Park.
So that includes both Tacoma Park residents and properties that are outside of Tacoma Park?
No, we didn't include the outside Tacoma Park.
So it's census tracts within Tacoma Park?
Subsets of it's the block groups.
Okay. All right. Because there's a lot of other affordable housing in that neighborhood, but it's outside of the city limits.
Yeah, we didn't look at that.
Okay. Thank you. And then on the recommendation or one of the possibilities for senior housing at the Washington Adventist Hospital site, had you given consideration to other types of affordable housing there, not just for seniors, but for other residents too?
Sure. We discussed that with M&L. I think our recommendation for senior housing is based on the fact that it's well, it's already located on the grounds of it would be located on the grounds of a medical facility, which would be an amenity for seniors. It's also a residential neighborhood, so it seems that seniors would prefer to live in an area that is quieter. That might be a better fit. It's definitely a possibility that it could be used for affordable housing of any sort, or mixed-use housing, mixed-income housing. There were just those two kind of aspects added to the recommendation.
Okay, so other than the potential renovation of some of the medical facilities, any affordable housing might be appropriate there?
Yes. Really, we see that as one of the opportunities to, have that last piece of developable land be turned into something that would really benefit the community long term. Not that other uses wouldn't, but because we know that there's a need for affordable housing.
Okay, and then lastly, you mentioned a couple of times the, I believe you called it a disincentive for reinvestment in properties and maintaining the properties by property owners who are under the rent stabilization program. Mm-hmm. And you suggested that if they made more money that they would then maintain those properties better. I think that one of the difficulties that we see that has impacted some of the buildings where we've actually had to, and some of the tenants complained tonight, had to relieve the property owners from the rent stabilization program and put them under other programs that would make them multi-income level of tenants. It's a different model, but the reason these properties got into that position is because of the disinvestment or lack of investment in those properties. And we saw that much of the infrastructure of the building, the air conditioning units, the elevators, everything else in the infrastructure of the building just degraded to a horrible extent and made the properties, in some cases, unlivable, uninhabitable. But given that the owners treat the property in that manner when they're making X number of dollars, doesn't give me any level of comfort that when you give them X plus, Y, that they're going to invest in those properties anymore. They're just going to take more money home.
Yes.
So, did you look at any possible approaches to ensuring that the properties are maintained at a level, whether they're under rent stabilization or not under rent stabilization?
Sure. So I think that the recommendations on a more flexible rent stabilization go hand in hand with the recommendations on being a little bit more stringent on problem properties, increasing fees, increasing the amount of inspections those types of properties get. You wouldn't want to raise the bar on rent stabilization and not keep those property owners who are repeat offenders. You wouldn't want to make that an advantage for them.
And the problem we have today is not that they're not taking care of the violations that they're getting. It's that we do not inspect things that are infrastructure items in the apartments. It's not part of the inspection process. And I just wonder if there's anything, a model anywhere in the country that does look at buildings to that extent, so that we could be inspecting the right things and knowing when owners are not doing the maintenance that they should be doing to maintain the viability of the property.
Yes, that's definitely something to consider as we go forward with this process, is to bring up some recommendations on that. Jerry?
Howard, I mean, a lot of these building systems, everything has a useful lifespan. So as part of like putting together the inventory or doing the inspection would be just adding to this, what's the age of the heating system, the air conditioning system, if they have an elevator, when was it installed? All those things have a lifespan, and it may vary a little bit from particular. One heating system may last 20 years and another may last 25, but those are generally documented, or you have an age range. So you would know this one's coming up, you need to do something about it. That would give you a mechanism. So it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to have an elevator expert every year, but you would know.
Just like a roof on a house. You know that you get a 20-year roof, you're going to have to replace it in 20 years.
Yeah, the same principle.
But I think at some point, regardless of the rent levels, that at some point the city has to be concerned about those items of infrastructure, so that we can make sure that the building stock remains livable.
Yeah, and you could tie the flexibility on the rent stabilization to actually making that investment. That if they're going to upgrade the elevator, or if they need to replace the elevator for a major building system, that automatically triggers a review or some process, because then if they're making that investment, they're not going to make it if they can't recoup the money.
We can argue about the details later. Thank you.
Councilmember Kolar.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I'm still kind of going through it, and there's a lot there. So I'm going to make a few observations, which you can respond to, and then a few questions. You mentioned that there is a potential way in which some of these things work at cross purposes with each other in the sense that if you have economic development, you may also, and that increases prices, you may also have greater displacement. And with the, I think 32% of the people unable to afford even rent stabilized properties on their own and 50% unable to purchase, that's obviously already a problem. So it seems like that challenge is the big one, to sort of figure out if there's a way to promote economic development without a huge amount of displacement or loss of affordable housing. I thought a lot of the suggestions looked good, and it's great to have the menu of choices. I do think that some of them seem beyond us on our own, just in terms of capacity, but maybe if we collaborated, which I think you suggest in some of those cases, with other jurisdictions, it might be easier to do that. And particularly since some of these are, there's very large forces sort of out of our control, right? I think Councilmember Schultz mentioned the other day, we're in the megalopolis that runs from Richmond to Portland or whatever it is. We can't just stop it all right here. And so, but maybe if we collaborate with other jurisdictions, we can. So when you talk about increasing the capacity of our staff, I mean, are you talking about just like one person? It sounded like a lot of stuff for one person to be doing, or is that like a whole department, an augmentation of the existing department that would be there?
Sure. So let me address your first point, that there's kind of two opposing forces. You're trying to redevelop and also preserve. I would say that market forces are coming, and unless the city of Tacoma Park kind of takes some action, then the market forces will create what has happened in many other places, which is just kind of massive displacement. So that would be my response to that. As far as increasing economic development capacity, I think that the model that you have now of working with individual kind of economic development consultants or folks who are in charge of areas, I think that's a good idea. I would say that, that list of things, you wouldn't want to necessarily have one person take over all of those things, but find a way to make sure that all of those responsibilities are taken care of by either a combination of one new staff member plus the existing capacity that you have, plus this suggestion of a business improvement district, which, yes, you would probably want to work with Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and other jurisdictions and maybe even the state to put that into place. So I'd say that, just kind of drawing up a plan, which will be the second step of this process, and making sure that all of those bases are covered is the most important thing.
So other than the cost of additional staff or consultants, does the money to do these things, would that come from us? Does that come from outside investors? Does that come from partners? What's your sense about that?
Well, there's definitely lots of ways to fund that. Public-private partnerships are one way that takes place. I know that Montgomery County has one already. Putting a bid into place could kind of fund, parts of that could fund itself. There would be funding that would be coming from both counties. As far as an economic development staff person for the city, there are suggestions on ways to raise revenue for the city, such as an increased property tax for vacant properties. And, I mean, I guess some of those responsibilities can be taken on by existing staff, but if you don't hire someone, then or if you don't expand that capacity, then, it might create more work down the road.
So like in Denver that you mentioned, I think in the report, it said they safeguarded 700 units, or 600 units, but it seemed like it could cost, tens of millions of dollars to do that. Is that a typical ratio, or?
That study, the Denver case study, that was provided as an example of how a city worked with their affordable housing fund to purchase land and then raise funds for affordable housing. So they actually worked with Enterprise, which is active here, and is looking at the Purple Line development. There are lots of different ways to fund economic development. I would not suggest that one person in the city of Tacoma Park would take on all of that responsibility. But yeah, that's my response.
All right, I'll let other people ask questions. Just one other thing. Would these financing sources, whether it's enterprise or private banks or whoever it is, syndicators of tax credits, be interested in a little place like us, or would they only want to sort of work with us if we somehow had a bigger project in some way that was through the county or other counties or the state or whatever? Do you have a sense for that?
I think that at the scale of working with enterprise or larger affordable housing developers like that, you would need to partner with other jurisdictions. But I think that you can, the same principles apply at the city level. Improving the Housing Reserve Fund and using that as leverage to encourage affordable development. You're making a deal with affordable developers. You're offering them something in response to what you want to achieve in your community. So yes, enterprise can do that at a big scale. I think that they're interested in partnering with communities throughout the Purple Line. But here in your community, hiring a staff person or increasing your capacity for economic development can help you do that at a smaller level.
Okay. All right, well, stop.
And I would just add to that, you can play bigger than you are through those partnerships, but also by your commitment to affordable housing, and what you guys are offering is we're the affordable housing community for the Washington, D.C. metro area. So you don't represent just Tacoma Park. You represent that beacon of affordability for the Washington, D.C. metro area. What other community is making that commitment? That's what can bring that other funding along.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayo?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation tonight. I wanted to talk a little bit about process and Councilmember Qureshi's comments at the beginning of the meeting, in that I hope we really put a lot of time into the next council, but with me happily attending, put a lot of time into meetings to talk about this, because I didn't see your report until yesterday. I saw your economic analysis and the SWOT analysis earlier this week. But just the seriousness, the content, the depth of data all deserve a lot of time. You probably heard us talk about, or maybe it didn't come up tonight, but sticky dot exercises with NDC, the developer at Tacoma Junction, looking at this kind of lighting and that kind of outside aesthetic. That's a very granular approach to bring the community into something like this. For me, on economic development with the Purple Line and with the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor, I feel it almost reminds me of this book I read as a kid called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where these species from another planet called Vogons come and they tell everybody, well, we're destroying the Earth. And they're like, well, you didn't read about it. It was in the planning office, for 6 months, and you guys never commented, so sorry. And it feels a little bit like that sometimes. So, for example, getting a plan or recommendations that recommend creating a tax on all properties within half a mile of the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor, that will come as a surprise to many people who didn't know we might be talking about something like that tonight, right? So that's just an idea that things like that are really good to socialize and spend a lot of time on. So I hope that we really put a lot of time into this issue. There are some things, and again, I haven't read the plan in detail as opposed to the economic analysis, so my comments may not be relevant because they're not relevant to that full plan. But there's some issues that I didn't really see well covered. So one is the affordable single-family homes, including affordability for existing seniors aging in place, fixed income, limited income residents. And I don't know if this kind of data exists, but are there data sets that show what is the affordability, looking at property tax, mortgage payments, et cetera, utilities of that kind of housing stock? So houses that might. We heard Mary Jane Machui, for example, speak about the house that she bought for, I think, $60,000 in 1989. how do people like Mary Jane stay in her house? How do people who have similar houses like that in Ward 6, the edges of Ward 3 and 2, along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, as the Purple Line goes in, how do they hold on to their homes? How do they stay in place? And I think that's a data set that we're lacking, and even if it takes a while to try to pull that information together, because we do have access to property tax information and utility data and home sale values, that we could potentially put that data set together over time, that would be a really important thing to know. Because I think holding on to that population, your report indicates that 25% increase in the senior population in the community. And while some of those people want to live in apartments or denser living environments, others don't. And so I think we really need to focus on that community and think about how we hold on to that population. I think the other piece that deserves more depth, and it's something I only learned about, or I learned more about by reading the analysis findings, is the I think it's $186,000 median home prices of the Langley Park area to our east. And so, for example, when I think about the racial equity analysis we do, we should be looking at that area, which is largely a Latino population area with $186,000 houses, and think about how what we do affects not just racial equity in Tacoma Park, but racial equity in our adjoining borders. And so, if we were going to create a bid or otherwise move forward, that's an area where the effects of our actions have a consequence, and the effects of county actions have a big consequence, not just on our population, but also populations on the other side. And I think I'd love to see more information that just gets at a little more granular level on the demographics of those adjoining communities, of the ownership versus apartment dwelling, population breakdown, and more information on price and things. And I think that would be a useful data set to have for the city as we go forward and plan, and I think try to convince Prince George's County and adjoining jurisdictions to try to create something together. We're going to need that kind of information. I wanted to just clarify, your slides talk about two different things. They talk about a tax on vacant properties and a tax on vacant structures. And I'm more excited about the structures one than the properties one. And I say that because there's sort of handfuls of undeveloped lots in residential neighborhoods throughout the city. Anything that's built in those, anything that's built in most of those lots is going to be another $500,000 home. And so I don't see that we're, by penalizing the current undeveloped state, I don't see that we're attracting housing for the populations that we're trying to get. Whereas, for example, a different strategy, like simply allowing more rental units to be permitted per street or per block of the sort of the basement, granny flat kind of apartments, by changing, for example, the parking requirements associated with those units. So you could have, instead of having 4 on the block of Sycamore Avenue near my house or Woodland, you could have 6. That's a way. That's probably a more effective way to get more people in some of our targeted populations integrated in the community than creating a disincentive for undeveloped single-family lots in some of these neighborhoods. And I also think the effect of a policy like that would be that the people who own those properties would just take the subdivision out of their property. They would combine, they would join lots, go through a $10,000, $20,000 process with lawyers and amalgamate their property so that it no longer appeared as a vacant lot. So it wouldn't have the effect that, for example, dealing with vacant buildings, would. So I just wanted to clarify that that issue. Was there data in your analysis? There's a sort of an overall analysis of rent prices and availability of different sort of tiers of rental property. Could you just talk a little bit more about the information that you found on rental unit prices?
I'm going to leave that to Jerry.
Awesome.
Should we bring the slide back up, or what's your question about that?
Well, what I'm trying to get to is that how affordable it is. Is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it 60%? Is it 80%? Those different tiers?
Yeah, we just looked at so it would be saying at 30% of your income if you earn at each of those different levels. So if you're earning $20,000 to $30,000, how many units could you afford at 30% of your income?
Okay. And could you pull up that slide, actually?
Yeah.
It's going to be slide 10, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Or 11, but in that ballpark.
It's just
Okay.
So do you have the same data for the whole city as opposed to just the Purple Line corridor?
We do have the numbers of units by income categories for the whole city. But yeah, we didn't put that in the presentation.
And would everything, for example, the 30, just sticking to this data, for example, there's 35 units in the $20,000 to $29,000 range.
Mm-hmm.
Would those all be in rent-controlled buildings? Are they in the exempted nonprofit-owned buildings, or is it a mix?
Yeah, I mean, we did not get into the which ones are currently rent-controlled or which ones are where, just sort of assuming that, you know, if this went through and all the property values were allowed to increase, you know, this is what it would, you know, generate.
Because I ask about that because I think that one of the, so let's just pick, and I'll just pick an arbitrary number, 50,000 and below here. If we were really careful about the work we did in implementing this policy going forward, we would try to make sure whatever we did didn't change that number or made it bigger. Mm-hmm. And so I think of, for example, you know, the recommendations that you made on shifting our rent control policy. You know, I think we'd really want to have the data knowing what percent of those units are in rent controlled versus other categories in advance, and then have an analysis. And this is not your responsibility, but the data might be something you could help with. If we were going to make changes, we'd want the analysis to say, will this affect at all the stock that is currently available in that price range? You know, how will it affect it? How do we make up for it? How do we compensate for it to build supply another way?
Yeah.
So that kind of analysis to me is sort of really critical. And again, like I'm thinking, going back to the single-family homes and affordability for people on fixed incomes, I'd really love to see some sort of similar kind of analysis in that respect. Just a sort of a couple.
Actually, can I just break in there? I just want to make sure, because on the page, I don't know which report this is, 46 of the data report, I think you're starting to get that analysis that Councilmember Mail is looking for, because you're comparing now to 2022, the market rate moderately priced and rent stabilized. And what I thought was interesting in this chart is that the MPDU program actually, because it's tied to median income, shows a smaller increase in rent than the rent stabilized. So that was actually one of the I wanted to highlight that on page 46 of that report, because I think that would be important for us to delve into more moving forward.
Yeah, and that's a great example where, to me, you know, I think I could spend 2 hours or 3 hours discussing, you know, just sort of going deep into this piece of the data, because it's hugely important, and I feel like we're often feeling in the dark on what the effect would be of different choices that we make. So that's a great example, and there may be others in there, but I just wanted to really highlight that issue for you. On the personal property tax issue associated with businesses, the concern that I have is that if you look at the historic tax base for the city, that businesses, through the personal property tax line item in our budget, pay a smaller percent of the overall revenue into the city now than they did 10 or 20 years ago. So I agree with the descriptions that you provided of the inequity of its application, but the concern is that if the burden just keeps going to what was largely single-family homeowners, that creates another set of problems associated with the economic development goal that you all, the city staff, and you guys agreed on as the sort of definition of the city. And so to me, it's, you know, how do we hold on to a reasonable balance of revenue that comes from businesses is reinvested back in business or commercial properties, and the tax burden on single-family homes and apartment buildings.
And that's where, I mean, like, that's somewhat also connected in with the creation of the BID. If you do the business improvement district, that's putting a tax on the businesses. The problem with the inventory tax, especially right now with the purple line, is you're paying it on your inventory, not on your sales or anything else. When the purple line construction comes in, those businesses may see a decrease in their sales. And that inventory is going to sit in the store longer, which means they're going to be paying tax on it maybe more than once. So that could put them out of business.
Yeah, no,
versus other,
Yep.
and that's why we're saying, like, at least suspend it for those businesses that'll be impacted by the construction.
During construction?
But then, look at replacing it with something, or lower it, and then, depending on what you do with the bid, you could lower the inventory tax. So we're not necessarily saying eliminate businesses contributing to the tax base, but, do it in a way that isn't going to, force people out of business where you lose a member of the community.
Yeah. No, I hear you on that. And again, I think, we should, as a sort of a budget goal, looking at the revenue from both property tax and from, at present, the inventory tax that comes from our business and commercial properties, and thinking about whether we're sort of returning that level of service back to them is an important sort of analytical tool to think about, the distribution of budget resources. But, the idea you just described is one way to try to make sure it's fair through a construction process. But to me, there's still that issue of making sure that, businesses are also paying taxes. We're having this national conversation now, sort of trickle down, right? Businesses prosper, we all prosper. It's not always true. Sometimes the costs and the benefits are distributed unequally. Just a couple more things quickly, the report, the analysis, talks about jobs. I think it was 300 people live here and work here, and 8,200 other people live here and work somewhere else. And so I think in terms of the just sort of a reality check on creating local jobs for local people, we just have to think about whether it's realistic to try to double, triple, quadruple that number of people, or whether we should focus on the bedroom community aspects. This is a great place to live. This is a great place to put your kids in school. This is a great place to find affordable housing, regardless of where you work. We're a well-connected transit hub that's going to get better because of the Purple Line and maybe because of bus rapid transit. And so trying to really focus on that as opposed to whether our residents both live and work here may be a more effective strategy. But I think to me, the reality check on how many jobs could we really create for residents versus people coming in, that's something that I didn't see in the analysis, but I think it deserves further work.
And some of that is, what's the goal for the community? What do you want to be? Do you want to stay a bedroom community? Do you want to see more balance? Then you can start to look at whether or not, what's the right number of, what's the balance we can actually achieve. So we didn't want to go forcing a goal onto the city and say it should be this and this should be the right balance, because that's what you as a community want to have.
Right. We could decide that we want to replace Ward 1 with Amazon's second headquarters, and then we would have a lot of local jobs.
Or you may not decide that, and it may happen anyway.
A couple of last comments. We currently treat sort of the basement apartments and single-family apartments the same way that we treat large businesses in terms of the training, the requirements, the inspection requirements on an annual basis. You talked about having electronic forms, for example, as making things sort of simpler. I think in that case it was for businesses. But to me, I think we want to make sure that the process of getting rental units registered, those sort of one-off apartment units registered, that people are treated as the kind of landlord that they are. We focus, for example, inspection effort in ways that get sort of the maximum bang for the buck for the hour really put in. Think about the horrible quality of some units and how we spend time in those places disproportionately, or we should be spending it disproportionately there as opposed to units where you only get, you see 3 apartments in a day of 3 people or 3 families. So I think there's some improvements in program implementation there that could help, that I'd appreciate your suggestions on. And I guess the one last question I'll put up to you now, and I just don't know the answer to this, but what about real estate transfer taxes? So if we're seeing, your report describes basically a 25% turnover in the period you examined in the single-family house ownership. So, in theory, in my block, 3 of my 4 neighbors would have moved in the time period you looked at. How far did you go back? Maybe one of them was me. I think it was like 2007, maybe. That was the period of analysis. So you just missed me.
That was a while ago.
But anyway, one out of 4 houses basically have flipped during the time that you were looked at. And the property values are going up fast, at least in some parts of Tacoma Park. If instead of the tax approach you talked about with bids, there was a transfer tax, would something like that? How does something like that work in terms of the fairness of its application, the sort of burden, in terms of? And again, I'm thinking about those homeowners like Mary Jane, who, if you told her she needed to pay another $200 a month because she lives in the area within a half mile of some zone, the impact of that versus when she or her son or someone else, sells it, that there would be $20,000 transferred, which is an easier burden to bear.
I mean, a transfer tax is going to be, create an issue on the sale price. So it may, when that house sells, it may sell for less. But you're only going to have to pay it when you're realizing that gain. So, and it's only going to be assessed on that value of the property if you assess it as a percentage, not as some other form of tax. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, it's less of a burden on any ongoing basis, compared to just adding an additional tax that somebody has to pay every year or budget for every month.
Mm-hmm. But so in theory, for example, we could, based on the 900-ish transfers that happened in the period you looked at, if we could potentially, or our city staff could model out, if we had a transfer tax of X, mm-hmm. this is how much revenue it would have generated over the last 15 years. If we assume, home values appreciate at Y, and the next 10 years the sale volume remains the same, we could predict the kind of revenue that would come from something like that to put into a housing fund or other economic development fund.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Qureshi.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and the thorough report, which I was pretty deep in the last 24 hours, and I appreciate that. I think my colleagues have covered much of the issues that I wanted to raise. I appreciate your focus on seniors in our community and their ability to remain in this community with fixed incomes or the like. I hope that a future council, as this process gets more focused, applies that sort of the data we've received on that and sort of acts on it, because it's a critical issue in our community that we hear a lot about that I think we haven't really taken concrete steps quite yet to the extent we can on. I also appreciate the emphasis on affordable housing, and I would strongly support and strongly urge a future council to consider expanding the Housing Reserve Fund. I think its use and success just this past sort of iteration of it is a testament to how much success we can see in that arena. But I would note also, I think for a new council to explore the concept of whether using the Affordable Housing Reserve to address maintenance needs at rental units, such that we're subsidizing some of the cost that often trickles down from landlords to their tenants, I think is something we need to look at. But I don't know how to do that now, and I obviously defer to your judgment and thoughts on that issue and whether that is in fact a thing that can happen. If the city does subsidize or considers that, whether we can see a benefit of affordable housing stock in the community and more appropriate affordable housing stock. The final question that I just had for you was your reports talks about assessing higher property tax on vacant structures. We've talked about this on the council. Thanks to Councilmember Schultz's leadership, we have a vacant or abandoned property registry in the city now, which is on its way to developing. But to me, it appears, and it's always appeared that way, that is a real opportunity to create affordable housing. You talked a little bit about the city functioning as a guarantor, and I didn't know if that was different from what you discussed earlier in response to Councilmember Schultz's question. But if you can describe that a bit, I think that would just be helpful.
Sure. I'll start in on this. The soft second mortgage is a suggestion that in which the city would serve as a guarantor for someone who wants to purchase a home. So if you were only able to qualify for $150,000, the city would offer that a lien on the property for the other $50,000, and then when it's sold, that would transfer. Are you familiar with this program? Because
no, this was Mullen
this is
and
a
Lonergan.
suggestion from M&L. So I don't have a full comprehensive view of it, but I would suggest for vacant properties, assessing a higher property tax. I think that's a super effective way to deal with vacant structures. But I also think that for a lot of vacant structures, sometimes there's ownership issues, or it's just kind of tangled titles is something that you hear a lot. Sometimes they're a burden for the property owners themselves. So if you had a affordable housing fund, and you were able to work with your economic development unit and that property owner and come to some sort of agreement where it would be possible to use that fund to leverage borrowing against so that the city could help to create affordable housing in partnership with the property owner. That's maybe a scenario where you could both benefit. The city gets the affordable housing, the property owner moves beyond the burden of that property.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you for the report. I have a couple of questions. So in the report, you talk about that we have a 39.3% of all our renter households are cost burdened, and 14% are severely cost burdened. And those numbers jumped out at me. The 39.3% seemed pretty high. But we didn't have comparison numbers of other places. Is it high? Do you know, in comparison to other?
I'm not the expert on that, so I can't offer an opinion.
Okay. So I would say, in particular, as we're working through this and going through it, I would like to see some recommendations and strategies particularly targeted to helping those residents in our community. Because right now, even though you gave us a wonderful list of different recommendations, I don't necessarily see any that would go directly to helping this population. So that's one thing. Building on what Councilmember Qureshi said, as we're moving forward in this, because we have the Affordable Housing Reserve, giving us some guidance on or some recommendations on how that money should be spent. I think Councilmember Kovar has been a strong advocate for us not to just hold on to that money, and that's one of the reasons we started piloting the Homestretch program. In terms of the personal property tax, your deeper explanation a few minutes ago was really helpful. So I think having more of that in the report of what your recommendation would be, suspending it during construction or other guidance on that would be helpful. And particularly the community land trust is an idea I'm very interested in, because I see that as also helping us look at how we get affordable housing dispersed across the community and not just concentrated in certain areas. And so the more we can explore that, I'd be really interested in that option. And then in the report, you talk about that we have under retailed. We're under retailed, as you put it. Since you were here for the public comment, and we're talking about the redevelopment of Tacoma Junction, I'm just curious if your analysis would allow for other areas of the city you see under retailed. Is it the entire city? Are there places that you see more retail would be particularly useful?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't necessarily get into, in the recommendations into the granularity of where you do it. This was more at the 30,000 foot level. But I would say in terms of, one of the things happening in retail where you do see the retail businesses that are successful now and that are surviving, because a lot of people are talking about all the bad things happening in retail and the challenge from Amazon or the store closures that are happening. And the store closures are your Sears and your Macy's and it's your larger format stores. The stores that are surviving are boutique stores, mom and pop stores, ethnic stores, specialty stores. So the more you have of that, those are the kind of things that are going to have more staying power and survive. And you really have limited places to put them. So we really, it wasn't really like any great, here's a spot you could do it. I mean, it's in those few existing areas. So it's really just kind of encouraging that infill and turnover. And one of the things we didn't have in the report, because we didn't really even know about it or really consider it until tonight when you're talking about the Diwali festival, those types of festivals are also a good way to kind of build that pipeline of new businesses to come in where you have a vendor who can maybe be selling at that festival. They're not really a retail location yet, but those are the kind of people to find out who are they, track them. That can be the next, when a business turns over, and they all do, those can be the ones you can put in, hey, you had great response at the festival. You want to set up shop here.
Great. And then in the more detailed report analysis, I think it's on page 37, you talk about how the HUD subsidized units in Victory Towers are going to expire prior to 2025, and then as well as the low-income housing tax credit funded units are also expiring at that time. That was news to me, and I just didn't know if we had more information on that, and maybe that's something we have at a later meeting, but what that will actually mean for our housing and what that means for Victory Towers moving forward, because 2025 is not that far away, and other things the city can do for that. So,
yeah, and you can negotiate extensions on those, and you can, but it's we're not the housing specialists. Mullen and Lonergan, they're the housing specialists, but in other places where we've worked with them, we've seen there are cities that don't realize it until the agreement has expired.
Right.
That's a much harder hill to climb than you've got this leeway till 2025.
Oh, great. And then there's a resident who's very interested in this, and I don't know if you explored it, and I know you're not the housing people. Tiny houses. I just have a number of residents who are very interested in, is this something to explore in the city? Is it feasible at all? And I don't know if you touched upon that at all, or in any other place that you're working in.
From what we understand about the accessory dwelling unit regulations in Montgomery County, accessory dwelling units have to be attached to the home, to the main home. It's possible that you could work with the county to do an overlay district, which might be able to be worked into an affordable housing plan. But it seems that would be a zoning issue on the county level.
Okay. Cool. And then I just want to say thank you very much. That was excellent reports. I love our definition of economic development. Thank you for putting that together, and even the opening of your report, acknowledging that we are a unique place for our size and population, given the diversity of our community. So thanks for getting to know us and giving this back to us. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have...
A lot of us haven't really been able to delve as deeply as we want into all of this. What should be the structure for additional questions or comments?
I guess that's I wanted to deal a little bit with that, and I don't know that it's been all figured out.
Yeah.
As Sarah mentioned at the beginning, we want to have some kind of back and forth discussions with community members. I think over time there's going to be specific topics that we'll want to focus in on very carefully. We'll need to work with the mayor on future agendas. So I think that there's lots lots more to talk about. Just as it's new to you, some of this is very new to me as well, and so we've not had real significant discussions about impact on staffing, impact on budget, and the two aspects of that I think will be coming before you relatively soon, as we get through into the budget process, is the idea of a bi-county bid. I think is actually a really remarkable idea, and I think it would help move the city forward a lot. But actually getting that started is real work, and the lobbying and effort that would take to do that is a staff-intensive activity, and it's not just staff, but it is an intensive activity. I think, and then also as we get into some of these discussions, there will be some things that, maybe don't take on a large amount of work. Councilman Romeo mentioned the need maybe not to focus on people with jobs that live in Tacoma Park as much. To me, I agree that that's not something to focus on right now, but it is something to monitor. How do we change over time? I actually think that the more important component related to that has to do with training. And we have a lot of young people in this community that we are not training for jobs to work in this community or close by. And so to me, that is an area where I think there is a closer nexus on jobs in Tacoma, in and close to Tacoma Park, and it's how do we train people for those. And then, of course, there'll be some legal issues that come up. Transfer tax. We can't tax anybody. We would love more options for taxing. But as we go through this, I think they'll be also identifying subjects that we lobby for. So, in terms of process, we have to work it out. But I think it's an exciting document to start with, and I look forward to working with each of you on the best way to tackle it.
And if it makes you feel any better, I mean, we finished the document Monday night, and the presentation. So it hasn't been sitting around. It wasn't like we kept it from you and it's been hidden. We just finished it Monday night, and then created the presentation last night. So, it has. We vetted it amongst the consulting team, and the staff saw bullets of but the text really didn't get done. So this is the first viewing of it. So, yeah, don't feel like, you haven't, this is the start of your getting familiar with it and review of it.
Okay. Councilmember Schultz?
Yeah, thank you. Because I have, listening to everybody else, I've developed a series of questions and comments. First of all, I think that the best part of your study is that you've described two key tensions. One are the pros and the positive and the negative effects of the Purple Line. And the second is the tensions created by rising property values and our rent stabilization organization, because those two really force us to focus on the real intersection of issues. I would ask, is there any possibility of us having a representative of Miller and Lonergan at a future presentation to the council? Because it seems like there's an awful lot of information that they know that you honestly can't answer. But it's just something to think about. With regard to the personal property tax, and you talked about trying to maybe suspend it or change it within that half-mile radius of the Purple Line. The fact is that that's where almost probably 80 to 90% of the personal property tax comes from, because that's the area between the Walmart, the Aldi, the TJ liquor store, the Walgreens. Walgreens. No, you probably thought, oh my gosh. No, the Walgreens, the Aldi, the Pretty's jewelry store, which has a huge inventory, the Mega Mart, and others. Those are the businesses that pay the lion's share of the property tax. And so if you take that out, you might as well just abolish the whole property PPT altogether, which I would actually favor myself. On page 23 of your report, you talk about making the city's emergency assistance program available. And you talk about that these residents may have difficulty because as their citizenship status generally limits their eligibility for federally assisted housing programs. That's news to me because you generally even know the citizenship of anybody. In our city, we make a policy not to ask that question. So I'd like to throw that into the hopper. I don't expect you to have the answer on that tonight. I like the idea of a business survey and the suggestions that you've laid out here because we've never really done a business survey. We do a survey of our residents every 2 to 3 years, and it's extremely valuable. But the questions that you pose in your report are really excellent questions. The tension with regard to the Purple Line and the increased cost of property, I think one of the solutions to that is the mixed-use development. Because if we can get property developers to develop, and we're trying to do this at the recreation center site, if we can get those property developers to really develop economically advantageous for them properties around the Purple Line, then they can afford literally to build affordable housing that will work for them and generate inventory. And I think that's one of the things we probably want to look at as much as we possibly can. In reference to creating a bid, this is something that this city has been thinking about, not in terms of a bid so much, but some sort of coordination between the two sides. And I would just point out that the Crossroads Development Authority is kind of like a bid right now because all the 193 property and business owners in that area are required by law to pay a license fee. And that's how the organization gets funded, and it's done some really good positive things. The key would be to try to double the size of it so that it goes to the other side. And I think there would be a lot of interest on the Prince George's County side to try to do something like that. But as Ms. Ludlow pointed out, it's going to be a heavy lift. With regard to, I noticed that when I worked for Arlington County for many years, and they have a proffer system there where developers who build, of course it's a much more expensive county in terms of property values and demand on real estate than ours. But they require developers over there, if they're not building affordable housing, to set aside funds into an affordable housing fund that goes to a nonprofit, the Arlington Housing Corporation, which has been in business for decades and has built tons and tons of or renovated housing. It's been very successful, and I think that's something I'd like you to look into. Also, you talked about the reticence of existing commercial property owners to give consideration to redeveloping. And one of the things that we need, and is not part of your study, and which I had hoped would be part of your study, but I understand why, is that we need to have a market study on commercial rents and commercial properties and disposable income, but just a classic market study that would reach a certain radius of maybe a mile to 3/4 of maybe a mile and a half, perhaps over to as far as the University of Maryland, and that scale radius, so that we can get an idea. We need to be able, the city needs to be able, the new economic development unit needs to be able to talk turkey to these reticent property owners and help them see the understanding that while they're making they're making positive cash flow today, no doubt, that what they're making is nothing near what they could possibly use to gain if they just paid attention to the data that we're showing them about potential rent increases, floor area, and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. And I would appreciate it if that would be something that you could include in your recommendations. And finally, I guess I would only add that unlike almost any other program that we try to launch here, is that in the long run, economic development has the capacity to basically pay for the cost of an economic development unit. Is that if we can get the tax base up, and this is going to take a long time, I understand that, but eventually it will pay for it should, by all rights, pay for itself, so that it's made, because we'll generate a lot more tax revenue over the long haul. And I think that's something we may need to bite the bullet in 2018 about, building that unit gradually, or at least start building that unit. And we're planning to hire the first person in the coming months, but to continue to build it, because there's such a wealth of information that we need to develop and then be able to educate residents about, and businesses and property owners about as well, so while we're educating ourselves. So those are just some of the things that I would like to have you think about.
Great. Thank you. Great. I think we're done. Thank you so much for making the trip. We appreciate it, and we look forward to continued conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Our last item tonight is discussion of fiscal year 2018 budget amendment number 2. I'm going to turn it over to the city manager to walk us through it.
Thank you. It's the budget amendment will be coming before you the next 2 weeks. We wanted to have a work session item simply just to go over it first, and I think it probably doesn't need to take very long, but I do want to highlight a couple of the different items. There's a number of carryover items, as we often have. So there's some remaining money in the 4th of July account that can be carried over for the FY 2018 4th of July event. For money for police radios was budgeted in FY 17 but not spent, but we do need to do the purchase, so that needs to be carried over to FY 2018. And funds for the MHP Trail Project and the TKPK 5K race also need to have balances carried over so that they can either be used or completed. The one item that's a little bit different, and part of the reason that we had this work session item, was to add an additional $10,000 to the legal services line that would help support legal work related to the city's Safe Grow ordinance and the activities challenging the county's similar pesticide law. And so that's something that we had not discussed in public, and wanted to be transparent that was something that needs to happen. We do have legal things that come up at times, and it's important, I think, that we just acknowledge that there's expenses that we don't anticipate. I don't know if there's much more that you may want to say about it, but I think that covers the main points.
Great. I just wanted one question on the racial equity impact statement. I don't know if this was just a carryover, because it talks about the summer youth employment program.
I don't understand that one at all.
I just I do read these.
Yeah, no, you know what? I'm assuming that was
something that got taken out, or
it must have been moved around.
We will just fix it for next. Yeah,
we'll make it so that it's appropriate.
Okay. And I just wanted to say on the legal fees regarding Safe Grow. When we did discuss this with our city attorney, I want people to also understand it is regarding the Safe Grow law, but at the heart of this is about preemption, and it is about taking away the city's or municipalities or a county's ability to pass certain laws.
That's right.
And so that is the overarching legal principle that is at stake in this case. So
That's right. So there's I think two aspects to this. One is that that there is a reason that we, other than just the merits of safe grow issues that the city's interested in. When it comes to legal expenses, the way that our attorney charges, I mean, there's lots of work that is done on a monthly basis, but when there's something that involves legal activity and case law, cases that he has to help, write papers, write through his submissions to court for, those are hourly costs, and so we do need to budget those separately.
Cool. Councilmember Kovar.
Oh, thank you. Two things. First of all, I just recall a different time of the 4th of July when we needed extra money, so I'm just wondering if there's anything unusual about that, or just kind of that's the way it happened to play out this year.
I think it's just the way it came about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things with the 4th of July that's always weird is because it's right after the first of the fiscal year.
I see.
The expenditures sometimes are a little strange.
Okay. I'm fine with that, and the other two there. I do have, I guess I would say, some skepticism about the legal piece. So I am sympathetic on the preemption question, but it also feels a little bit like we don't really know what it's going to be, and I suppose that makes sense because until the research is done, you may not know what it's going to be. But I also think that there had been some talk about linking up with the Maryland Municipal League, and so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm just feeling a little bit like this is something that's
absolutely
unclear to me.
When we do budgeting, we do the best estimate that we can. In this particular case, the amount could have been a lot and may still be higher, but because there does seem to be an opportunity for close cooperation with the county attorney, the expenses may not have to be as high as as we originally thought they might be. So $10,000 seemed like an appropriate adjustment, but it is something that we will be monitoring over time, and we may need to come back and either say, we didn't spend it, or it's going to be more. Mm-hmm. So that's the best I can do. That's one of those legal costs are one of those things that you just have to keep monitoring.
Yeah. So strategically, I think there's a wide range here in the community because the day the decision was announced, or maybe the next day, I got emails from people saying, we have to file an amicus brief tomorrow, meaning tomorrow at that time, in support of the county. And the same day I got people saying, now's the time to stop enforcing the law at all and never do an amicus brief. And so I'm grappling with it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the preemption issue is a significant issue for municipalities, and it could be on this topic or it could be on some other topics. But this is the one that's before us and could set a precedent that could hurt us in the future.
But the topics would be things like our ability to chart our own course on like local election law, as we do on some of these things.
I assume so.
Or,
I mean, I think
that would be an example. That I'm not saying that's going to happen in Maryland, but that's the type of thing you're talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about what is allotted a municipality to be able to do versus what does the state say you can't touch.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, and it's late and our city attorney isn't here, but maybe when we vote on this next time, he can come and explain it.
Sure.
When we did have and I know Councilmember Kovar, you weren't able to join us for the closed session when we had the briefing on this, but my understanding from our city attorney was that the basis of the court's decision on this wasn't on the merits of safe grow, but rather were basically on preemption. And so the appeal will be focused on preemption on this, not the merits of the safe grow law. And so I think that was another reason that those of us who were briefed in that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I missed that meeting. I will give it further thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Councilmember Schultz.
That's not me.
Oh, your light's on. You did. Councilmember Mail.
No, it looks
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of brief comments. The first, and the city manager should correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I just wanted to add the context of the way we used to bill our city attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And we would see monthly bills. We often, at the very beginning of my time on council, we got very detailed sort of itemized lists of things that were going on.
Mm-hmm.
And legal costs went way up and down. And there were often significant charges associated with litigation.
That's right.
And so I think the number in the budget for that legal line in the past was probably greater and more unpredictable, with us having less granular information over it at any one time for the budget amendments or for the number in the original budget. And I think the difference here, the trade-off, is that we now have a fixed number, but then we get requests like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my recommendation is to have patience for these kinds of requests, because my view is that when the city manager supports them, I mean, the city staff's analysis on expenses like this is important. But it's just to me, it's still an evolving process, figuring out which billing approach works better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think certainly when our attorney is asking and identifying these kinds of expenses, it's probably still the structure we have is probably still resulting in more cost consciousness than when the system we used to have in place. Because we're asking the question, well, how much? 10,000. Okay, we'll go back for more if it's more than 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Getting approvals like the one the city manager has brought to us today.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say it's already it's a big step in the right direction, but I think we definitely want to make sure that we can defend ourselves when needed, and that's what this funding is for.
Right.
I was trying to think of examples where, and I'm sorry, generally am I correct in that?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes, you are.
And in terms of the preemption issue, I mean, I know in some places state law is very clear where preemption must be explicit, where it's not explicit. But I think of things like we adopted police body cameras before the state had.
That's right.
The state subsequently adopted body cameras. What if their action, just simply them taking action to provide body cameras for state police, all of a sudden made it impossible for us to do anything different, anything at all? That's the equivalent of what I see here, because the state has said something about pesticides. It makes the whole area of policy off limits to us.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that affecting any number of issues that are important in social policy. I think the elections may be a little different because we have a specific carve out for local control of elections in the Maryland Constitution, maybe.
Yeah,
but some aspects of elections might be different.
I'm not going to say that there's one topic or another, but I mean, there certainly have been multiple areas of discussion about how far can the city take something, and this is an area that's pretty vague, the way that it's written. So
yeah, and I think of for example, we I think had an AG's opinion when we allowed non-citizens to vote. We faced some threat of state legislation to try to take that away. Those were big preemption battles,
Mm-hmm.
And I just I really question the current AG's office coming out with the views that they did on this issue, given that kind of historic context and consequence of the state telling municipalities that any action by the state legislature makes large areas of policy off limits. Thanks.
All right, I think we are done for the evening. We are adjourned. We'll be back next week.
Still today.
I know. You need a ride or anything?
No, I drove down.
You can give me money.
Okay, everybody out there, this is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate, coming to you with a few words of peace. I suppose you heard what's been happening lately around the country and stuff. A lot of racism going on. You know, they threatened Howard University and everything else. And today, a guy got hold of a gun, shot 3 people in Maryland. I think it was, I don't know if it was Deanwood or what it was. But he shot 3 people, and then he went over to Delaware and shot another one. 3 people died, and one is